Hello, and welcome to the Bewarecast. I hope you're well. In this new mega compilation video, we'll be looking at the strange worlds of author, geologist, and paleontologist Dougal Dixon. We'll be covering After Man and Man After Man, and also the 2002 speculative zoology documentary The Future is Wild, which he had a hand in creating, with many of the creature designs being a product of his imagination. And also, we'll be taking a look at another one of his books that I haven't talked about until now, his controversial yet seemingly vindicated 1988 book, The New Dinosaurs. But before we start, I'd like to quickly ask that you please hit the like button and the bell icon, share this video around, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel as it really helps with the algorithm. Thank you. Now, let's get started. In this video, we'll be taking a look at every species to appear in the 2002 speculative biology documentary The Future is Wild. We'll go through them all according to their place in the timeline of this universe. The first section will consist of new species found 5 million years in the future. The second will concern those found 100 million years in the future. And the third section will show species that exist 200 million years in the future. 5 million AD. Earth has entered another ice age 5 million years into the future. Many animals familiar to us have gone extinct, including human beings. In their place, other creatures fulfill the roles they used to play in the ecosystem. The glaciers of the Arctic Circle have increased their reach, the Mediterranean Sea has dried up and become a desert of salt, the Amazon rainforest is now a dry, savanna-like environment, and the agricultural belt of North America has dried up, becoming a cold, wind-swept desert environment. Snowstalker. The apex predator of the frozen tundra. The snowstalker is a mustelid, descended from the wolverine. It hunts for prey while camouflaged against the blizzards that frequent the freezing winters. It preys upon the shagrat. Shagrat. These herbivores are descended from marmots. Much like today's musk ox, they live in herds and migrate with the seasons. Their special fur is doubly insulated to keep them warm in the freezing winter. They are preyed upon by the snowstalker. Gannet whale. Descended from gannets. By this point, most sea mammals, like whales and dolphins, have gone extinct. In their place, seabirds have filled in, growing larger and more blubbery. However, these birds can't really cut their ties to the land completely, since they need it to lay their eggs. Cryptile. A lizard that has adapted well to life on the salt. It can maintain great speeds for its survival. It mainly subsists on brine flies, which it catches using its frill, then licks them off with its long tongue. Scrofa. A miniature descendant of the wild boar. The scrofa is, like its ancestors, a species of pig. Unlike today's pigs, it has longer legs to leap across crevices and hooves that are modified to tiptoe on the uneven rocky ground. It is mostly herbivorous, but it won't turn down cryptile eggs if they're not hidden well enough. Grycon. Another saber-toothed mustelid. Its ancestor was the pine marten. When the forests disappeared, it evolved to live and hunt on the ground. It hunts scrofa, mainly because the cryptiles that use its rocky habitat to lay their eggs are far too fast to catch. Babukari. Among the last of the primates, having not gone extinct from the shrinking of the forests. The babukari is descended from the uakari, one of the few South American monkeys that was generalist enough to survive, as it was able to feel equally comfortable on the ground as well as the trees. It is colourful and intelligent, clever enough to weave spherical baskets to trap fish. Karakilla. A predatory flightless bird descended from the caracara that inhabits the grasslands. South America used to have something similar in the distant past. It preys on babukari. Grassland rattleback. An armoured, slow-moving rodent descended from either the paca or the agouti. It resembles a cross between a turtle and a pangolin. It isn't fast, but its thick armour will protect it from virtually anything. A larger and more slender species lives in the North American desert. Desert rattleback. The larger and more slender relative of the grassland rattleback, having migrated from South America over millions of years. In contrast to its South American cousin, this rattleback has smaller scales, as there are less situations in which it needs protective armour, a larger tail to store fat reserves, and a coat of shaggy fur on its face to protect it from the sandstorms. Spink. Descended from the quail, this bird has taken up an extremely unusual lifestyle. It is flightless, its wings have been reformatted into spades for digging. They live in a caste system, dwelling in massive networks of tunnels under the desert that are led by a group of females, the queens, that are capable of determining the sex of the eggs. It has rather poor eyesight and relies on a clicking, squeaking song to communicate. Death Gleaner. A very large, carnivorous bat. Unlike most of today's bats, the death gleaner is completely diurnal, partly to take advantage of the warm air currents to generate lift, and partly to avoid the freezing cold nights. Taking on the role of vultures and hawks, they are both predators and scavengers. Spinks and juvenile rattlebacks are their usual prey. 100 million AD. As another 95 million years pass by, the Earth becomes a very different place. The continents have moved to very different locations. There is also more oxygen in the atmosphere and much less ice in the polar regions, leading to lush jungles and warm, shallow seas. Swampus. An octopus that is equally at home in the water as it is on land. They live in close-knit family groups, mostly comprised of females, and form a symbiotic partnership with a vase-shaped swamp lily in which they raise their young. They only have 4 tentacles, as the other 4 evolved into stout rudders they use for moving about on land. They're fiercely protective of their young, surprisingly good at jumping, and are dangerously poisonous. Toroton. Descended from tortoises, these creatures are huge, said to be larger than even the biggest dinosaurs. Since it is so large, its ancestral shell has been reduced and now serves mainly to support its massive bulk. Lurkfish. A descendant of the electric catfish, this well-camouflaged predator is incredibly sensitive. It's covered in prickly appendages, which help to disguise itself as a fallen log as it rests along the riverbed. It utilizes an electric field to detect whenever potential prey, usually the swampus, is approaching. When the prey is close enough in range, the lurkfish shocks its unlucky victim with 1,000 volts of electricity, paralyzing them or outright killing them before it swallows them whole. Ocean Phantom. A giant community of several jellyfish-like organisms living together, much like its ancestor, the Portuguese man-o'-war. It is essentially an organic ship, utilizing maneuverable sails to catch the wind, and polyps on its end that propel it forward like rudders. They prey on juvenile reef gliders, but are themselves eaten by the adults. It strangely reproduces by riding the fierce storms fueled by the endless expanses of warm water. The storms may break it apart, but the pieces can still continue living and even regrow themselves like an amoeba, provided they have one of each of the essential organisms that make up the phantom. Spindle Trooper. Descendants of the sea spiders found in today's oceans. These creatures live within the ocean phantom. They act as the Phantom's personal armada, deployed to fend off potential threats, much like ants. Hacking and slashing at any creature unfortunate enough to attack the Phantom, the Spindle Troopers mob the intruder relentlessly until it finally leaves the Phantom alone. Reef Glider. Enormous sea slugs that will eat pieces of the ocean phantom when fully grown. There are several species that live in the reefs, where their young feed on the red algae, helping the plants in pollination the same way insects pollinate land plants. Their young are preyed on by the ocean phantom. Spitfire Bird. A flutterbird that defends itself with a unique duo of chemicals. When mixed together in its nostrils, these chemicals become caustic and burst out of the nose in the form of jets of a burning, corrosive substance. It hovers near the flowers of the spitfire tree, much like a hummingbird. But instead of consuming nectar, it really gathers up the needed chemicals from the plant. The tree is able to produce both male and female flowers, each with one of the spitfire bird's chemicals. Through visiting both flowers to refill its ammo, the bird ends up becoming a pollination service to the tree. There is also an entirely separate species called the false spitfire bird, which relies on its mimicry of the true spitfire bird to avoid predation. Falconfly, a descendant of the sand wasp. This impressively sized insect utilizes a venomous sting, razor-sharp pointed legs to spear a flutterbird in mid-flight, and powerful jaws to tear them apart. It mainly preys on the roach cutter, both to eat for itself and to feed them to its larvae. Its larvae are large grubs scattered in burrows throughout the forest floor. If all the grubs were put in the same burrow, they would cannibalize each other. As such, the falconfly has developed an impressive memory, recognizing landmarks as to where each burrow is. Roach cutter, a flutterbird that hunts insects. The roach cutter may be small and rather generic, but its bulging eyes give it a wide range of vision. It is also fast and agile, able to nip small insects off a branch mid-flight. Spitfire beetle. These beetles live primarily in groups of 4 and utilize cooperation to bring down their prey. They stand head-to-head, opening their wing cases to mimic the shape and color of the spitfire flower. They wait motionless for a spitfire bird looking to refuel its chemicals. When one comes close enough, the beetles lunge on it, dragging it down to the forest floor. Once the bird is dead, the carcass is shared by all 4 beetles. Great blue windrunner, a magnificent bird of enormous size. A descendant of the crane, the bird possesses a second set of wings on its legs that help it stay aloft in the thin air. Its blue coloration helps protect it from the harmful ultraviolet light of the plateau. It feeds on silver spiders, which it can snatch from their webs in mid-flight. Silver spider. Large spiders that, unlike the spiders of today, live in a caste system. Whatever size a certain individual is details what function of the colony it provides. The smallest spiders, line casters, begin the construction of their webs, which stretch across the plateau by producing silk while gliding in the air using parachutes made out of the tufts of grass tree seeds. The next size bigger, web builders, then construct the framework of the web, making them sturdy enough to catch the grass tree seeds floating on the breeze. The next size bigger, workers, spend their lives gathering the seeds, which they then collect in stockpiles throughout their burrows. The biggest spider of the colony is the queen. She is the only spider allowed to breed, and is fed and cared for by all the others. The spiders are preyed upon by the great blue windrunner. Poggle, the very last mammal on the planet, a weird-looking rodent with large, bulging eyes. It lives in the caves of the silver spiders and regularly pilfers their seed reserves. The spiders seem to tolerate the poggle's thievery, as if they are treating it as some kind of pet. In actuality, the spiders are treating the poggle as livestock, giving it more and more seeds to eat until it's fat and nutritious enough for their queen to devour. 200 million AD. A massive extinction event has come and gone 100 million years prior, and the animals left have since adapted to the new world. The continents have once again come together to form a global supercontinent surrounded by one giant ocean. All terrestrial vertebrates have gone extinct, leaving the planet to become dominated by insects, fish, and mollusks. This is an entirely alien Earth now, but intelligent life is on the rise once more. Terabyte. Descended from termites, these insects are highly efficient and highly specialized. Colonies of them live in vast towers scattered all across the desert. The towers themselves, made from a mixture of sand, feces and terabyte carcasses, are only a small part of the terabyte habitat. A type of algae is the terabyte's main source of food. As they live in a caste system, there are various forms. Gum spitters immobilize other creatures with a sticky goo. Water carriers bloat themselves on whatever water is available to moisten the algae that the terabytes farm. Rock borers spit concentrated acid onto the rocks below the towers to weaken them. Biters use powerful jaws to carve the weakened rock into new tunnels. The last remaining caste are transporters, the only terabytes with functioning legs. Their main role is to carry the other castes on their backs and take them to where they're needed. Garden worm. A strange worm that resembles a fern. Much like its ancestor, the convoluta worm, the garden worm forms a symbiotic relationship with green algae. The wide, leaf-shaped appendages at its sides help the algae in its skin gather sunlight, which in turn becomes nutrition for the worm. From time to time, garden worms are captured by terabyte raiding parties, where the gum spitters spray their glue over it. When the worm is restricted, the terabytes crop whatever algae they can from its algae lobes for their algae gardens. A garden worm can also free itself from the terabyte's chemical weapons with its own chemical device, a secretion produced from in between its segments that dissolves the terabyte's glue. Whenever it's not sunbathing, it lives in the dark underwater caves, where it's vulnerable to being preyed upon by the slick ribbon. If it's being pursued by a slick ribbon, it can spew a cloud of noxious liquid right into its path. Gloom worm. Rather generic creatures, gloom worms often spend their lives swimming in the vast underground reservoir of the desert, eating the bioluminescent bacteria that provide light. They're also a food source for the slick ribbon. They're descended from bristle worms, the only marine worms that remained after the mass extinction. Over time, they settled into the various aquatic cave systems. Eventually, bristle worms evolved into multiple new species of worms. Slick ribbon. The top predator in the darkened underwater caves of the desert. A large predatory worm that carries a deadly weapon, a powerful clasping jaw mounted on an extendable trunk. It catches other swimmers, such as gloom worms, with its deadly maw, which it can extend in a fraction of a second. Silver swimmer. These are curious creatures, descended from larval crustaceans that practiced neoteny, the ability to breed in a larval stage. There are numerous species of them swimming all over the global sea. Some are predators, some are scavengers, and others are filter feeders. They have occupied the niche formerly filled by fish, but are themselves prey for flish. Ocean flish. While gone from the seas, fish are still very much in existence in this new ecosystem. These particular fish, descended from cod, have evolved to breathe air and even fly, taking over the skies after the birds went extinct. Sometimes they may get flung by the global sea's hypercanes all the way to the rain-shadow desert, where they'll certainly perish under the hot sun. But in doing so, their carcasses, referred to as flish wrecks, play a vital part in the desert's ecosystem. Rainbow squid. This absolutely colossal cephalopod is the biggest thing in the global ocean. Like its ancestors, it utilizes chromatophores, special muscles controlled by the nervous system to change color. This squid, however, has a much more developed brain and utilizes its color-changing abilities to its benefit. It can disguise itself as a shoal of silver swimmers to trick fish into diving towards it, then uses a tentacle to snatch them out of the sky. They gather in the shallows every year on the night of the autumnal equinox to breed, with males competing among one another to produce the brightest colour displays. Unlike their ancestors, who die when they mate and lay their eggs, rainbow squid don't follow this coded death after breeding, even being able to live for as long as a century. Sadly, their size doesn't always protect the squid, as a certain predator can overcome its colour-changing abilities. Sharkopath. Sharks are tough and resilient creatures. They've not only evolved long before the dinosaurs, but they have survived several mass extinctions throughout Earth's history. The Sharkopath is no exception. As the only fish still clinging to water in the global ocean, it's the most advanced and ferocious form of shark ever to live. Unlike today's sharks, the Sharkopath hunts in groups, partly because of the advantage of strength in numbers, and partly because the sea of the future is so immense that this helps to cover more distance in search of food. It uses bioluminescent patches on its sides to signal to its fellow sharks when it finds food. The closer potential prey is, the faster the markings flash. Desert hopper. Despite its size and appearance, the desert hopper is actually a snail. A modern snail's foot is a powerful muscle coated in mucus to assist in locomotion. To prevent the creation of this mucus, since water is far too important to waste, the hopper's foot has evolved into an entire leg. This single leg gives the hopper an advantage, since jumping allows it to cover great distances in search of food. It also has tough, scaly skin to assist in the prevention of secreting slime. Like modern snails, the desert hopper has a radula, a tongue coated in rows of tiny hook-like teeth to eat its food. The hopper's radula is razor sharp, allowing it to dig through the hard cuticles of what little edible plants can survive in the desert, so it can reach the watery tissues inside. Desert hoppers are particularly active in the night. During the day, they keep themselves cool by burying themselves in the sand. When the sun goes down, they rise out of the ground shell first, then begin hopping to whatever plants are available. Bumble beetle/grimworm. A rather peculiar insect with a rather peculiar life cycle. The bumble beetle spends its life in a race against the clock. It can only live for exactly one day, and it spends that one day flying over the desert in the hopes of finding a flish wreck. No two bumble beetles can share a carcass, and if two of them come across the same one, they engage in an aerial dogfight. The carcass is the only essential place where the bumble beetle can release its young, large carnivorous maggots known as grimworms. After splitting its abdomen open to release the grimworms, the bumble beetle then dies. The grimworms then spend every moment they can munching away at the carcass. Grimworms also practice neoteny, mating before they reach adulthood. During mating, the largest female grimworm eats all of the males, plus any smaller females, then digs itself underground to pupate. As a result, every single bumble beetle is female, already pregnant with new grimworms. Death bottle. Since water and quality soil are practically non-existent in the rain-shadow desert, the plants here have to take drastic measures to function. Among the most successful and hazardous of these plants is the death bottle. It feeds on desert hoppers with a crafty trapping system. A hopper is then lured to the leaf-covered stems of the plant, then suddenly falls into a hole in the sand. This hole is actually the death bottle's feeding chamber, its walls lined with poisonous spikes. Over time, the spikes begin constricting toward the struggling hopper, eventually piercing the snail's skin and allowing for digestive juices to start breaking it down. To reset the trap, the plant regrows the thin membrane above the entrance to its feeding chamber and waits for it to become covered in sand. For reproduction, the death bottle also makes use of bumble beetles, looking for flish wrecks to deposit their grimworms in. To this end, the death bottle grows flowers that mimic the appearance and stench of a rotting flish. After a while, the bumble beetle will notice the flower and crawl into a hole in its centre, cleverly made to look like a flesh wound. Inside the flower is another chamber, one full of sticky seeds. The bumble beetle will begin frantically flying around the chamber looking for an escape. In the process, the seeds become stuck to its abdomen. The death bottle also has a built-in eject mechanism for getting rid of the bumble beetle. When the insect hits a certain spot in the seed chamber, the plant literally tosses the bumble beetle out. When engaging in a dogfight over a flish wreck, the seeds coating the bumble beetle become loose and land in the ground next to the carcass, as they are the only nutrition in this harsh environment. Mega squid. A member of the pterosquids, this elephant-sized cephalopod is the giant of the forest. A solitary creature, the megasquid spends its life shuffling along the forest floor, looking for food to please its endless hunger. Being boneless, 8 of its tentacles have evolved to become pillar-like legs supported entirely by muscle. It is also able to emit calls through a bladder on its forehead, filled with thin membranes that are vibrated by the air it breathes. Omnivorous and not in the least choosy, it happily devours anything it can catch. Slither sucker. A unique organism, the slither sucker isn't a plant or an animal. It's a slime mold, a community of single-celled organisms that move and operate as one being. Slime molds today are rather small and simple, but over millions of years, the slither sucker has evolved to become more adapted to whatever the forest throws at it. It takes on the shape of lichen fruits, a favourite snack of the megasquid. Once eaten, it then makes its way into the megasquid's brain, controlling it until it reaches a specific destination. Upon arrival, the slither sucker makes the squid sneeze, making the cephalopod spew chunks of the slime mold out of its vocal sac. This is how it spreads, as the expelled chunks grow into new slither suckers. The slither sucker is also predatory, draping itself on the branch of a lichen tree to catch any forest flish that flies into its path. Once a forest flish is caught in the slimy curtain, the slither sucker begins utilizing digestive juices to enjoy its meal. Forest flish. The smaller and more colourful cousins of the ocean flish. Like ocean flish, these fish have left the water completely to fill the niche of birds, and their pectoral fins have become wings. But unlike ocean flish, forest flish have had their pelvic fins evolve into hooks. These hooks help them to roost upside down on branches like today's bats. Like the birds of today, they fill the forest with their songs. The only difference is that their chirps are more reminiscent of grasshoppers than of birds. Squibbon, the last organism that we see in The Future is Wild. Another kind of pterosquid, these cephalopods are the opposite of the megasquid in every way. They're small, incredibly active, and live in large numbers. Squibbon live high in the forest canopy, jumping and swinging around on the branches like today's gibbons. They're actually even more flexible than gibbons, since they have no bones to impede movement. Unlike the megasquid, squibbon have their eyes mounted on stalks, which they can extend to vastly improve their range of sight. Squibbon are also known to be quite knowledgeable. They're not only the smartest animals in the forest, but they're said to be the most intelligent life forms since humans. They have a complex form of communication, live in large social groups with parents, siblings and relatives, and have even developed the capacity to learn, training and playing at a young age by swinging in the branches. This helps to sharpen their senses as they grow. With all these advantages at their disposal, it's heavily implied that squibbon will eventually become the next dominant species on planet Earth. In my last few videos, I talked about the various species to be found in the works of Dougal Dixon, namely the books After Man and Man After Man. Today, I'll be continuing on in the same vein, but this time covering a book I haven't talked about before, Dougal Dixon's 1988 speculative evolution work, The New Dinosaurs. The book is a fascinating one, and is notable for having been heavily criticised by some paleontologists at the time of its release. However, According to Wikipedia, quote, "Several of Dixon's hypothetical dinosaurs bear a coincidental resemblance in both appearance and behaviour to dinosaurs that were discovered after the book's publication. As a general example, many of the fictional dinosaurs are depicted with feathers, something that was not yet widely accepted when the book was written." Interesting. So, before we get started with the various animals contained within, which I'll go through by category and alphabetically, I'll give a brief rundown of the story. Now basically what the new Dinosaurs explores is an imagined alternate version of the present-day Earth as Dixon imagines it would have been if the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event had never occurred, which was caused by the Chicxulub asteroid impacting the Earth and causing a mass extinction event. Dixon applies ecology and evolutionary theory to create believable creatures. Most of them are descendants of dinosaurs, pterosaurs and plesiosaurs, which we'll begin to look at now. I'll be keeping the descriptions short for now, as I'm sadly pushed for time at the moment. However, I do plan to come back to this book in the near future and go into it more in depth. We'll begin with the ammonites. The coconut grab. An ammonite that crawls onto land to grab coconuts, similar to our robber crab. The coconut grab can even climb trees. Kraken. A massive floating ammonite with a shell 13 feet in diameter. Its tentacles are covered with poisonous barbs like those of a jellyfish. These deadly tentacles spread out in an area of 67 feet in diameter. The kraken only fears the Pelorus, who is immune to its poisonous stings. Next up we have the dinosaurs. Balaclave. A large mountain-dwelling thescelosaur, an American relative of hypsilophodonts. It feeds mostly on the sparse vegetation along mountain slopes. Bricket. A furry hadrosaur. Cutlass tooth. A saber-toothed predatory dinosaur. Coneater. A large social hypsilophodont with a elongated snout to store large batteries of cheek teeth. Crackbeak. An arboreal hypsilophodont that evolved specialized perching feet. They use their beaks for cracking seeds and fruit. Cribrum. A flamingo-like predatory dinosaur with slender teeth for straining soda lakes for microorganisms. Deboril. A small running and hopping hypsilophodont. Dingum. A meter-long predatory dinosaur with sexual dimorphism. Males are partially quadrupedal with a sail atop its back. The rays in its sail are tipped with venomous barbs containing poisons from consumed desert plants. Females are larger and look more like a typical predatory dinosaur. Dip. A fish-eating, mountain-dwelling predator. Floret. A gliding predator. Footle. An agile, squirrel-like two-legged arboreal carnivore. Gestalt. A colonial pachycephalosaur. They build fortresses in trees where the queen sits on eggs. Males serve as soldiers in the colonies. Gimp. A nectar-sipping arboreal predator. Glub. An aquatic hypsilophodont with no back legs. Gourmand. A scavenging tyrannosaur with detachable jaws and no front limbs. Guana. A kangaroo-like relative of Iguanodon. It inhabits grasslands and deserts. It has 2 movable fingers with 2 stationary ones and a thumb spike. Hanuhan. A fleet-footed rock-dwelling hypsilophodont. Jinx. A sickle-clawed predatory dinosaur that imitates the coneaters. It looks and smells like its prey, so packs can wander into coneater herds and attack. Lumber. A large sauropod with a short tapir-like trunk. Megalosaur. A surviving carnosaur from the Mesozoic. It survives on an island off the coast of Africa and spends most of its time scavenging. A species of dwarf megalosaur inhabits small islands. Monocorn. a furry one-horned ceratopsian dinosaur. Mountain leaper, an agile mountain-dwelling predator. Norga, a woodpecker-like arboreal predator. Northclaw, a predatory dinosaur with a claw on its arm used for killing. Numbskull, a mountain-dwelling pachycephalosaur. Pangaloon, a pangolin-like carnivore. Pouch, a duck-like predatory dinosaur with webbed feet, a stiff tail, and a transparent throat pouch like that of a pelican. Rajafant, a socially sophisticated sauropod. Sandal, a burrowing mole-like predator. Scaly glider, an arboreal carnivore with a fan of plates along its sides for gliding. Spring, a predatory dinosaur that attracts its prey by playing dead, then stabbing it with its sickle toe claws. Sprintosaur, antelope-like hadrosaurs. They come in two types, short-tailed crested sprintosaurs and long-tailed sprintosaurs without crests. Taddy, a panda-like hypsilophodont. Taranta, a desert-dwelling ankylosaur. Titanosaur, one of the few sauropod dinosaurs on Earth. It survives on a large island off the coast of Africa, as well as some dwarf species on various smaller islands. Tree hopper, an arboreal leaping predator. Tree pounce, an agile marten-like arboreal carnivore. Tree worm, an arboreal snake-like predator with a slender neck and no front legs. Tromble, a massive flightless grazing bird from the Arctic regions. Tub, a slow-moving koala-like hypsilophodont with a pot belly and short legs. Its tail is shorter than its ancestors. It eats mostly eucalyptus leaves. Turtosaur, an armoured sauropod. Wasp-eater, a thick-scaled anteater-like predator that eats wasps. Water gulp, a manatee-like hypsilophodont. Whiffle, a flightless insect-eating bird. Worm, a snake-like predatory dinosaur with no arms, thick belly scales, and an armoured head used as a shield when burrowing. Next we have the book's only mammal, Zwim, a swimming placental mammal. And now the pterosaurs. Flarp, flightless and ostrich-like from Africa. Harridan, a large condor-like pterosaur from South America. Clune, small, flightless and moa-like with no wings and flexible feet. Lank, flightless and giraffe-like. Paraso, solitary heron-like pterosaur. Plunger, a penguin-like pterosaur. Shore runner, a small mobile island dwelling pterosaur that behaves like a gull, beachcombing and eating the corpses of any animal stranded on shore. Although its wings are slightly atrophied, it is still capable of true flight. Sift, a pterosaur that is fine-toothed and heron-like in appearance. Saw, an albatross-like pterosaur. Wandle, a giant flightless moa-like pterosaur that lives in high-altitude plains in small groups from New Zealand. And finally we have the plesiosaurs. Bird snatcher, a large bird-eating elasmosaur with an elongated neck. Pelorus, a fish-shaped pliosaur that eats fish. It also hunts the kraken and is one of the few predators that is immune to the kraken's venom. Wulk, a large whale-like plankton-eating pliosaur. Thank you for watching this video on the species of Dougal Dixon's The New Dinosaurs. In this video, we'll be taking a look at every species to appear in Dougal Dixon's 1990 speculative evolution work, Man After Man. As usual, we'll be going through them all in alphabetical order. Now very quickly, I'll give you some background on the story. In Man After Man, by the 23rd century, Earth has become a toxic wasteland, almost uninhabitable. Human beings plan their departure from Earth to seek out new worlds to colonize, and in doing so, the first genetically engineered humans are created to aid in this mission. They are put to work on the gigantic spacecraft that will take humanity to the stars. By the 25th century, a group of intelligent future human species, themselves physically weak and overly reliant on machines, begin to design 5 new future human species to repopulate the desolate Earth and occupy the ecological niches once inhabited by now extinct animals. Here, I will give a brief overview of every species to appear. But before we start, I'd like to ask that you kindly hit the like button to help with the YouTube algorithm, and if you end up enjoying this video, please hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of future uploads. Thank you. First we have the Ant-Men, a species of chimpanzee-like, ant-eating descendants of the temperate woodland dweller from the 30,020th century, 3 million years in the future. Some diets are so specialized that the entire body form evolves to accommodate them. The slow-moving and solitary Ant-Man has claws for tearing open ant hills, a long middle finger for reaching into the tunnels, and a startling coloration to warn enemies that its flesh is not good to eat. Extreme adaptation has lost the Ant-Man the sharp teeth and nails of its woodland-dwelling ancestors. Instead, the Ant-Man's defense is its vivid coloration and its specialized diet. Aquamorph. These beings were created with the purpose of helping in the construction of underwater deuterium mills for fuel used for the interstellar colonization project due to the collapse of the human civilization. These are characterized by their modified paddle-shaped legs, which allow them to swim, in addition to the change of the form of the head, which adjusts to be hydrodynamically efficient when swimming. The face is quite narrow, but broad at the sides, possessing only a couple of holes, rather centered eyes, large nostrils, and a wide mouth. Due to the genetic modifications on facial tissue and head shape, this is incapable of making facial gestures. Aquamorphs are able to breathe under the water by the use of gills that are located in the chest. They possess a high intelligence similar to Homo sapiens, and are able to use tools which they carry in a special belt. Although their inability to reproduce would lead them to their extinction after having completed the interstellar project, the experimentation of a lineage adapted to aquatic life able to survive and reproduce would continue by the same engineers who created them just before the project ended, establishing the foundations for the aquatics to be created. Aquatics. One of the 5 genetically modified base species of post-humans that appear in Man After Man, developed to inhabit the aquatic environment, presenting many more marked adaptations than its indirect ancestor, the aquamorph, with a highly modified morphology and the ability to reproduce. This is, chronologically speaking, the very first species capable of surviving on its own, and it turns out to be the last post-human lineage to survive after the mass extinction of 5 million years in the future. The aquatic is characterized by possessing a quite robust and wide body, head and chest. The hind limbs have modified into a long tail that finishes in a flat delta-shaped fluke. Its oval head has a flat face with huge glassy eyes like those of a fish, and also a rather reduced and atrophied nose that is only formed by the nasal openings, and a large wide mouth. This has a series of pectoral gills which were added with the purpose of making it dependent on aquatic life without the need to breathe air, a minor legacy of its aquamorph predecessor. The 2 arms still have the original arm structure of their ancestors, including hands with fingers. However, it has 2 paddle-like extensions on the sides that together form a fin for swimming. Cave Dweller. This species was never given an illustration in the book. It is a hibernating, cave-inhabiting descendant of the temperate woodland dweller from 10,000 years in the future, the 120th century. It lives most of its life in subterranean caves. Desert runner. The desert runner, also known as the hunter, is a carnivorous, swift-footed, gremlin-like descendant of the temperate woodland dweller from the 30,000 and 20th century. A quote from the book gives this description. The fatty deposit across its shoulders can be depleted, but not yet exhausted. Bat-like ears radiate waste heat. Although similar in appearance to a hiver, the desert runner's ancestors originated in the temperate woodland. Through convergent evolution, the desert runners are beginning to adopt the shape that was designed into the plains dwellers all those millions of years before. However, the runners are carnivorous, unlike the hivers. Engineered pack animal. Beings of gigantic and voluminous aspect, characterized by their long arms and short legs, with enormous mechanical parts in the upper body which fulfill the function of breathing, having their head projecting from the back, these are used as creatures of work. Engineered food creature. Engineered from the hosts into mounds of fat and flesh, fed by chemical nutrients by the travellers of the stars. Small machines remove chunks of meat, tissue and body fat while the food creature is still alive. Engineered worker. Creatures genetically engineered from the temperate woodland dwellers who work small machinery, and instead of a head they have long black box-like devices. Fish eater. The fish eater is an upland-dwelling, semi-aquatic, piscivorous descendant of the temperate woodland dweller. It is a patient hunter, waiting for freshwater bony fish to swim closer in range. 3 million years have passed, and the results of constant natural selection and evolution are apparent. The temperate woodland dwellers have diversified and developed specialized body forms to fit different environments. Living by upland lakes and beside rivers, the fish eater is equally at home on land and in the water. Its pelt is smooth and glossy, its shape streamlined. Ears are small and close to the head, the neck is short, and feet are broader than usual. The hibernator. The hibernator is a forest-dwelling future human, another descendant of the temperate woodland dweller, and characterized by its ability to hibernate for long periods of time. The hibernators appeared during the period of 5,000 to 10,000 years hence, a product of the new cold climate. This species is capable of hibernating for the amount of time necessary to withstand the cold temperatures during the winter months, until the arrival of summer. However, only the males are able to do this, with the females being forced to migrate southward to survive, give birth, and care for their offspring. But these migrations often result in the loss of several females. The males are versatile in the construction of shelters formed by wood, which they use to pass the winter by and to accumulate the necessary food. Females appear to have a much lower life expectancy, living just a few years. This species is polygamous, and males tend to breed with different females throughout their lives. High-tech. This human subspecies diverged from Homo sapiens sapiens around 300 years hence for its almost total dependence on technological means to provide vital support to its fragile and atrophied bodies that vary in the degree of degradation depending on the individual. This by means of mechanical cradles, structures such as a box with a window where the head protrudes from the inside, while the body is kept suspended inside by means of harnesses and hydraulic arms. The cradle is connected to a huge crane with the central life support system in the back, which moves by means of levitation thanks to magnetism. Socially, they present several human characteristics and emotions, although they are able to regulate them artificially by means of different chemical compounds. Several of them seem to show a dislike for the original humans, considering them unsophisticated or primitive, and they only tolerate them for their versatility and ability to maintain their machinery. They live inside huge facilities, some of which are dedicated to the cultivation of synthetic foods, being driven by solar energy or the ocean thanks to huge underwater turbines and mobilized using large flying vehicles. Host. The host, or parasite host, is a bulbous, blubbery descendant of the tundra dweller from the 20,000 and 20th century, 2 million years in the future. It usually plays host to parasites, hence the name. The islanders have evolved parasitic feeding habits that rely on the tundra dwellers' metabolic need to produce surplus fat. In this way, the obese hosts have found an ecological niche that allows them to exist now that the tundra plains have disappeared and the hunter symbionts and symbiont carriers failed. Hunter symbiont. The hunter symbiont is a spindly descendant of temperate woodland dwellers from the 120th century, 10,000 years in the future. They made peace with certain tundra dwellers, which became the symbiont carriers 5,000 years earlier. Two species form a single unit of value to both: symbiosis. The hunter symbionts have skills that their symbiont carriers lack. The hunting ability of the swift hunter symbiont provides enough food both for itself and its slow-moving carrier. The symbiont carrier, in turn, provides both with general movement and protection against the cold. Islander. The islander, also known as the island voyager or the island person, is a small-sized human from the 520th century, 50,000 years in the future. Descended from the temperate woodland dweller, those of the island clan, they have a mostly carnivorous diet and are downsized due to insular dwarfism. Memory people. The memory people, also known as boat people, boat builders, travellers or possessors of hereditary memory, are Australopithecine-like future humans from the 70th century, descended from the temperate woodland dweller with an advanced memory, able to literally recall the ways of their ancestors. As the genetic engineers have long gone, there can be no further artificial changes. When climates and conditions shift, altering habitats, the inhabitants must normally adapt or evolve to survive. But some of the woodland dwellers have had a different option. Parasite. A small parasitic descendant of the islander from the 20,000 and 20th century. The plains dweller. Also known as the grassland dweller or migrant, it's a dark-coloured, troll-like species of human from 500 years in the future, engineered from antlers, that fills in the niches left behind by grassland-dwelling hoofed animals. A human engineered to live on open grasslands needs the adaptations of a grass-eating, non-human mammal. For the plains dweller, these include massive teeth that are replaced if they wear out chewing tough, silica-rich grasses and, more importantly, a specialised stomach within the bloated abdomen containing engineered bacteria that can break down cellulose, a substance not normally digestible by the human frame. Cutting edges on the hands help to scythe the thick grass, while the long legs enable the creature to move swiftly over the open landscape. Slothmen. A giant ground sloth-like descendant of the tundra dweller from the 30,000 and 20th century. Temperature climates encourage the evolution of large creatures, bulk retains body heat, and large leaf eaters can find enough nourishment to support their mass. By a process of convergent evolution, the slothman is now similar to the large ground sloths of South America and North America from previous times. But two factors were needed to allow the tundra dwellers to evolve into slothmen: plentiful food and no enemies. Sustenance is still there, but now they face a newly evolving predator, the spike tooth. Socials. The socials are pale, fat humanoids descended from the communal plains dweller that lives in the desert. Their principal enemies are the hivers, because they steal their babies and raise them as their own. Socials live in groups with a queen who is larger than all the others, similar to eusocial insects such as termites and ants. Spike-tooth. The spike-tooth is a vicious, predatory, smilodon-like descendant of the temperate woodland dweller. They usually hunt in mated pairs. Large plant-eating animals inspire the evolution of meat-eating creatures to feed upon them. The spike-tooth is heavier than the other hunting species of human. It can afford to be, needing neither speed nor stealth to hunt the leaf and twig-eating slothmen. It has slashing front teeth, able to penetrate the thick fur and tough skin of its prey. Temperate woodland dweller. The temperate woodland dwellers, also known as temperate forest dwellers, woodland dwellers or ground dwellers, are a quadrupedal, highly adaptable, Australopithecus-like human from the 25th century, engineered from antlers, that takes niches left behind in temperate environments. Their limbs are ideal for climbing trees. A human engineered to survive and flourish in a temperate forest without the backup of civilization would need to be omnivorous. Forests are less abundant than tropical jungles. To reach the full range of foodstuffs available, the temperate woodland dweller has to be extremely nimble and be able to live both at ground level in the undergrowth and high in the treetops. Arms and legs are of similar length and long, but agile climbing fingers increase its range. A covering of fine hair keeps the woodland dweller warm in the temperate conditions. Tick. A subspecies descendant of the high-tech that appeared between 500 to 1000 years hence, these voluminous and amorphous beings are the final result of the attempt to maintain artificially atrophied living bodies without the need of machinery. For this, they created the cultural cradle, a completely organic system which externally looks grotesque, being walking bags of flesh and fat that house within them several organs and a withered human body. Its face and functional sensory organs remain intact, and a number of legs and arms protrude from their flabby bodies that vary in amount depending on the individual aesthetic selection. Not much is known about their culture or cultures, and it can only be inferred that they were more or less the same as their high-tech predecessors. When the ticks' civilization began to collapse, they presented violent behaviours between one another, even killing their peers in violent fights due to the desperation to survive, assaulting facilities and succumbing to blind panic. Travellers of the Stars. The Travellers of the Stars, also known as Builders and Jemez Smoot's descendants, are the most advanced future human species to appear in the book, being the distant descendants of the human beings who originally left the Earth in the 23rd century. After 5 million years, the Travellers of the Stars find the planet Earth, yet they are unable to recognise that this is the planet of their ancestors. In a few hundred years, they radically transform the Earth's surface, building huge cities on land and oceans, transforming fauna into work and food tools, collecting all available resources, and gradually changing the atmospheric composition. At the end, in another 100 years, eventually they leave the Earth, probably in search of another planet to use, leaving the world in ruins and with only a handful of survivors in the deep ocean. Tree Dweller. The tree dweller is an arboreal tree sloth gibbon-like descendant of the tropical tree dweller from the 30,000 and 20th century. The long hooked fingers evolved to cling to the jungle canopy, but they can also break open insect nests under the bark. Small but slow, the tree dweller moves with deliberation through the humid rainforest, clinging tightly to the underside of the great spread of branches. Fruit is plentiful and insects abound. With no enemies and abundant food, there is no need for speed, aggression, or change. Without the need to adapt or develop, the tree sloth-like tree dweller will remain in a state of stasis, able to breed, but unchallenged. Tropical Forest Dweller. The tropical forest dweller, also known simply as the forest dwellers or tropical tree dwellers, is an arboreal orangutan-like human from the 25th century, engineered from antlers, that lives in scrubby tropical forests. There is plenty to eat in tropical habitats. The climate is stable and seasons do not regulate the food supply. Like earlier animals that lived there, a human being engineered to live in the abundant rainforest needs only the ability to climb to feed itself. Cunning and intelligence are not necessary, though an instinct for survival is. A level of intelligence will redevelop in the tropical forest dweller over the coming millions of years as evolution takes place, but not as much as in species faced with more challenging environments. Tundra dweller. A large, white-furred, yeti-like human from the 25th century, among the 5 originally engineered future humans meant to live in tundra and conifer forests. They managed to survive and thrive for a staggering 5 million years before eventually being wiped out by the travellers of the stars. Vacuumorph. An odd, genetically engineered, infertile, 3-lunged crustacean-like human, descended from the modern human, that can survive the wild winds of space in the 22nd century. The ultimate triumph of the genetic engineer. The product of grafting, surgery and cell manipulation, the vacuumorph can live and work in a free fall of orbit and the airless void of space. The basic human reproductive cells were manipulated to produce the necessary shape, but extra organs had to be grafted on, including a hard, impermeable exoskeleton grown from tissue culture. The result, however, is sterile. The vacuumorph has a limited life and no future of its own. The vacuumorph cannot breed and would not survive the rigours of gravity. Water Seeker. The Water Seeker, also known simply as a seeker, is a desert-dwelling, chimpanzee-like human from the 520th century, descended from the temperate woodland dweller. It is able to detect water from very far away. In this compilation video, I'll be spending the next hour and a half going through every species to appear in Dougal Dixon's 1981 speculative zoology book, After Man. We'll go through them all in alphabetical order to make things easier, but before we get started, I'd like to ask that you please hit the like button as it helps with getting my channel recommended, and if you end up enjoying this video, then please hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of future uploads. Thank you. Now, onto the video. We'll start with the anchor whip, an extremely long, thin, arboreal treetop canopy-dwelling colubrid snake from Africa, similar to the boom slang. It is among the several tree-living species of the African tropical forest, and is perhaps the most specialised. Its broad, grasping tail, the most muscular part of its body, is used to anchor it to a tree while it lies coiled and camouflaged among the leaves of the tallest crowns, in wait of an unwary passing bird. The snake is capable of darting out 3 meters, equivalent to about 4/5 of its body length, and seizing its prey while still retaining a tight hold on the branch with its tail. The angler heron. An Ardeen heron from the temperate wetlands of North America, descended from the green heron. Fishing skills have been developed to a high degree by the angler heron. This bird creates shallow ponds at the water's edge in the shade of overhanging trees by scraping at the river bottom and constructing shallow dams. On the shore nearby, it accumulates a heap of droppings and fish remains to attract beetles and flies. These it then picks up and drops into the shallow water to entice the fish into its pond, where they are easily caught. The bardalot. A large migratory tundra-dwelling predator rat from the northern hemisphere tundra. It is the only real enemy of the woolly gigantelope, and is a creature that would have been very much at home back in the first half of the last glacial period. With the advent of the gigantolopes, the saber-tooth pattern in predatory mammals has reappeared, but this time among the predator rats. The bardalot, unlike other members of the group, exhibits sexual dimorphism in that only the female is equipped with saber teeth, as well as a bony pouch for them, and hunts woolly gigantolopes. The male, having none, resembles more the polar bears that once inhabited this altitude and hunts the seal-like pytheron rats. Bardalots are about 8 feet long and 3¼ feet high at the shoulders. Males have a mass of about 499 kilograms, females about 390 kilograms. The beaver, now a newly evolved postomic form from coniferous forests in Europe, Asia and North America, similar in shape to pinnipeds. One large rodent that became adapted to a semi-aquatic way of life during the Miocene, partly as a defense against predators, was the beaver. After humans went extinct, the beaver became even better adapted to life in the water. Its tail and hind feet have become fused together into one large paddle, which, when powered by its backbone, produces a powerful up and down swimming stroke. Its ears, eyes and nose are placed high up on its head and remain above water when the rest of the animal is submerged. Surprisingly, the paddle does not impair the creature's movement on land and is used as a grasping limb, enabling it to climb partway up trees, increasing its potential supply of food and building materials. The booty bird, a large tundra-dwelling, long-necked corvid from the northern continent, descended from the carrion crow. It is the largest avian enemy of the meeching. It has a long neck and bill and long legs, and in this respect looks rather like a heron. Indeed, in summer it even behaves like a heron, wading into shallow pools and streams to dip for fish. In the winter, it develops insulating feathers along its legs to protect them from the cold and becomes a land predator, hunting any smaller animals that are active at the time. It probes for meechings through the snow. The broadbeak, one of the larger predatory birds found in conifer forests in general, having a wingspan of over a metre. It is descended from the starlings, which expanded to fill the gap left when many of the ancient predatory birds became extinct during the reign of humanity. It has a rounded tail and broad, blunt wings, which enable it to fly swiftly and maneuver in the tight spaces between the trees. It has a straight, powerful bill and strong talons, which it uses to grip its prey. The chirrit, a herbivorous, tree-dwelling, long-bodied squirrel from the temperate woodlands of Eurasia. Plant-eating mammals abound in the trees of the deciduous forests, eating shoots and leaf buds in the spring and fruits, including nuts, in the autumn. The chirrit is a typical plant-eating mammal. Its particular shape is a legacy from an immediate ancestor, the chiselhead of the northern coniferous forests. As it spread south into the temperate woodlands, it found that it no longer needed to make deep tunnels in the trees to escape the harsh winter, and as a result, the animal's specialized chiseling and gnawing teeth became smaller, its dentition reverting to be more like that of its distant ancestor, the eastern grey squirrel. Its bodily shape, however, was still perfectly adapted to life in the trees and remained unchanged. Now that the animal no longer led a burrowing existence, its legs and feet had to evolve to suit its new environment. Its hind feet, although small and short, became very powerful and developed strong gripping claws. The underside of its short tail grew hard and scaly, and with its hind feet formed a strong three-point anchor that could secure the animal to the tree while it reached out to collect food. As its ancestors' jumping ability has completely disappeared, the animal can only move from one tree to another by reaching out and grasping an extended branch. For this reason, the chirrit is found most often in dense thickets, where the trees are close together. Its only enemies are birds of prey, and it is really only vulnerable to these when feeding in the topmost branches. It retains the predilection of the burrowing squirrel for making nests in holes in trees, and often occupies holes and hollows excavated by wood-boring birds. The chiselhead, a Eurasian conifer forest-dwelling squirrel descended from the eastern grey squirrel. Throughout the Cenozoic era, the rodents were one of the most successful animal groups in the coniferous forests. Their powerful teeth enabled them to cope with the tough vegetable matter found there, and their warm, furry coats helped them to retain body heat during hibernation. The chiselhead, a rodent and a relation of the temperate woodland chirrits, is highly adapted to life in the coniferous forest. Its huge incisor teeth and worm-like body enable it to burrow deep into the living wood, where it can remain protected from the cold in the wintertime. Although in some ways the animal is at an advanced stage of development, its parasitic way of life is really quite primitive. Its staple diet is the bark of trees, which it strips off completely, leaving the tree totally denuded. This, combined with the massive damage it does by burrowing, kills the tree within a few years. As the chiselheads only colonize live trees, they must be continually on the move, and every spring, after hibernation, the young of the new generation migrate to find new territories. During migration, they are very vulnerable, and many are taken by predators before they can complete the journey. This balance between chiselhead and predator is highly critical, and it needs only a slight reduction in the number of predators to produce an increase in the population of chiselheads that would lead to the total destruction of vast areas of coniferous forest. No other small rodent found in the coniferous forest is quite so destructive. The chuckaboo, an energetic, monkey-like possum from the Australian rainforest. As in previous ages, the Australian marsupials of the posthomic have developed forms that are superficially very similar to those of placental mammals existing in similar environments in other parts of the world. A prime example of this is the chuckaboo, essentially a marsupial monkey with grasping 4 legs, opposable digits, and a prehensile tail. Its bodily form, similar to many of the true monkeys in Africa and Asia at this time, is well suited to life in the trees. The clatter, a grey herbivorous lemur sloth-like loris from the tropical forests of Asia. It is a prosimian with a heavily armoured tail protected by a series of overlapping horny plates, demonstrating the principle of tree-dwelling primates that developed new physical attributes to protect themselves from strigers. Before the arrival of the advanced tree-living predators, such a tail would have been a disadvantage, interfering with the efficiency of food gathering. Any tendency for such a cumbersome structure to evolve would have been quashed rapidly by natural selection. But, faced with constant danger, the efficiency of food gathering would have taken on an importance secondary to defense, and would have therefore created the correct conditions for it to evolve. The animal itself is a leaf eater and moves slowly, upside down, along the boughs. When a striger attacks, it drops down and hangs from a branch by its tail. The clatter is now safe. The only part within reach of the predator is too heavily armoured to be vulnerable. The cleft-back antelope, a reduncine bovid from the tropical grasslands of Lemuria that is superficially similar to an ancestral antelope. It has a curious symbiotic relationship with the tick bird. This relationship is really no more than a strengthening of the symbiosis that had developed between small birds and large grazing mammals during the early part of the Cenozoic. Birds on the grassy plains often accompanied the large mammals, catching the insects disturbed by their hooves, or pecking ticks and mites from the hides of the big mammals themselves. The grazing mammals tolerated this as the little birds ridded them of parasites, and also gave warning of approaching danger. In the case of the cleft-back antelope, the relationship has become more intimate, and the animal's back has ceased to be a mere perch, and has become a nesting site. Along the animal's back is a pair of ridges, supported by outgrowths from the vertebrae. Between the ridges is a deep cleft lined by stiff hairs that provide an ideal nesting medium for the tick bird. Several families may nest on its back at any one time. Superficial warts on the animal's flanks produce pus at certain times of the year. The pus attracts flies, which lay eggs in the warts. The flies' maggots appear just as the young birds are hatching and provide them with a ready-made source of food. In return, the antelope is supplied by both a constant grooming service and an early warning system that alerts it to approaching predators. The common pine chuck, a finch from the coniferous forests of Eurasia with great sexual dimorphism in which the male and female look like two completely different species. It is descended from the European green finch, which was a bird similar in physical appearance to the present-day female, and the male has evolved his own distinctive features primarily for display, and his eating habits are a secondary development. Of the many seed-eating birds found in the coniferous forests, the largest is by far the common pine chuck. The two sexes of this species are quite different, both in appearance and in their mode of life. The male is much more powerfully built and is equipped with a massive beak, which he uses for breaking open pine cones to feed on the seeds. The female, much smaller and drabber, totally lacks the male's heavy beak and is really a scavenger, supplementing her diet with carrion, grubs, adult insects, and other birds' eggs. The desert leaper, a large kangaroo-like gerbil from the deserts of Asia and Africa, with the lifestyle of a dromedary camel. The extinction of the dromedary camel is at about the same time as humanity died out, and left a niche that was distinctly unattractive to any other animal. For a large animal to exist in desert conditions, a quite remarkable physiology is required. The dromedary camel, for instance, was able to lose about 30% of its body weight through dehydration without ill effects, and it stored all the subcutaneous fat of its body in one lump, leaving the rest of the body free to radiate heat. It could tolerate fluctuations in its body temperature to some extent, and had thick nostril covers and eyelids that effectively kept dust and sand out of its nose and eyes. After some 50 million years of evolution, these features have all developed again in one postomic animal, the desert leaper. The leaper is descended from the sand rat and has grown large. Adult males may reach more than 3 meters from nose to tail. The tail is the most unusual feature of this animal. It is here that all its subcutaneous fat is stored. The fat is not a water store, but a store of food that enables the leaper to go for long periods without eating when food is unavailable. When the fat store is full, the animal's body is well balanced and it can leap quickly along on its hind limbs. In this condition, it can undertake journeys of 100 kilometers or more between waterholes and oases. It has broad, horny pads on the toes of its hind feet, which prevent it from sinking into the sand and give it a good grip on naked rock. The desert shark, a large, predatory, naked, mole rat-like white-toothed shrew from the deserts of Asia. It is sausage-shaped, with a blunt, strong head and powerful shovel-like paws. It swims through the sand rather than burrowing, bursting into rodents' nesting chambers, such as sand flapjacks, which it locates using the sensory pits at the end of its nose. It is almost completely hairless and avoids the extremes of temperature by remaining underground for most of the time. When it is at rest, it lies just below the surface with only its eyes and nostrils protruding. The desert spickle, a small, long-snouted geomyoid from the deserts of North America. Among the thorns found in the vertical grooves of cactus stems lives the desert spickle, its narrow body covered by spines that are partly for defense and partly for camouflage among the cactus thorns. It has no teeth and subsists entirely on the nectar of cactus flowers, which it drinks through its long snout. When collecting nectar, it often picks up pollen on its head. The pollen is eventually deposited on the stigmas of other flowers, thus affecting the cross-pollination of the cacti. Living almost solely on nectar, the spickle's digestive system is a very primitive affair, since nectar is very easily broken down. Predators of the spickle include long-legged quails, the Dinosaurs, a large semi-aquatic relative of the predator rats from the polar ocean that looks like a cross between a beaver and a walrus. Among the organic detritus on shallower areas of the ocean bed of the polar ocean are found banks of shellfish. Living on these shellfish is the Dinosaurs, by far the most massive swimming relative of the predator rats. It reaches a length of about 4 meters and has an insulating coat of matted hair, made up of a mosaic of solid plates, giving it a lumpy rather than streamlined appearance. Its most unusual feature is its teeth. The upper incisors form long, pointed tusks. In males, the left-hand one projects forward whereas the right-hand one points straight down, and is used as a pick for removing bivalves from the sea bottom. This asymmetry is also found in the limbs. The left forelimb only is equipped with a strong claw, which it uses to dislodge particularly stubborn shells. The fat snake, a large elipid from the undergrowth of the Australian tropical forests. Convergent evolution on the Australian subcontinent is not solely characteristic of the marsupials. The fat snake has adopted many of the characteristics of forest ground-dwelling vipers, such as the gaboon viper and puff adder of the long-lived genus Bitis that are found in other parts of the northern continent. These include a fat, slow-moving body and a coloration that renders it totally invisible in the leaf litter of the forest floor. The fat snake's neck is very long and slender and allows its head almost to forage independently of its body. Its main method of catching prey is to deal it a poisonous bite from where it lies hidden. Only later, when its venom has finally killed it and begun its digestive function, does the fat snake finally catch up with it and eat it. The fin lizard, a small bipedal iguanian lizard with no front limbs from North American deserts. Lizards and other reptiles do not have the sophisticated mechanisms that mammals and birds have for regulating body temperature. Their temperature is entirely dependent on the surroundings. Several desert reptiles in the postommic have, however, developed rudimentary devices for keeping themselves cool. The fin lizard, for instance, has a system of erectile fins and dewlaps on its neck and tail, which it raises into the wind when its body becomes too hot. The heat is transferred through the fins via the bloodstream into the air. When cooling off, this lizard typically balances on one leg while keeping the other off the hot desert surface to get maximum benefit from the system. Predators of the fin lizard include long-legged quails. The flightless auk, a flightless semi-aquatic penguin great auk-like alcine auk from the polar ocean. In winter, the polar ocean is largely barren. In spring, however, the sunlight produces a bloom of unicellular algae near the surface, which provides food for the microscopic animal life that forms the basis of the oceanic food chain. In spring, shoals of pelagic fish come northwards through the northern island barrier to feed on the zooplankton, bringing with them countless numbers of seabirds. The first bird species to arrive is the flightless auk, a totally aquatic creature with paddle-like wings. In this respect, they resemble the penguins, which were so successful in the southern hemisphere in earlier times. Apart from during the winter, the flightless auks rarely come ashore or climb onto the ice, where they are quite defenseless. Pregnant females retain their eggs until they are almost ready to hatch and lay them in the open water. The flightless auks first evolved at the northernmost tip of the northern continent and, as they became established, spread both east and west, forming a chain of subspecies in a ring around the polar ocean. Throughout most of the ring, each subspecies is able to breed with the neighbouring ones, but where the ends of the chain overlap, the differences are so great that no interbreeding is possible, and these populations must be regarded as separate species. Flightless auks are often preyed on by pytherons. The flightless guinea fowl, a large, flightless, wingless guinea fowl from the tropical grasslands of Africa, descended from the helmeted guinea fowl. Standing about 1.7 meters high, it sports a startling selection of erectile wattles and inflatable throat pouches, which are used in threat displays when dominance or pecking order is threatened. It is an omnivorous bird and feeds on seeds, grasses, insects, and small reptiles. Although it can deal a lethal blow with its broad feet, in common with most plains-dwelling animals, it runs off when real danger threatens. Mating occurs in the early summer and normally results in 1 or 2 eggs being laid 5 or 6 weeks later. The incubation is shared by both males and females. The flightless shaloth, An omnivorous, flightless, arboreal primate sloth-like vesper bat from the tropical forests of Batavia, which spends its life hanging upside down like the ancient three-toed sloth. It eats leaves and the occasional insect or smaller vertebrate, such as a rodent, caught by a swift jab of its single claw. The flua, a strange, flightless, largely sedentary leaf-nosed bat from the tropical forests of Batavia. Its brightly coloured ears and nose flaps mimic a species of flower found on the islands. It sits among them with its face turned upwards, snapping at any insect that attempts to land. Although it has arisen independently, the flua's feeding mode is remarkably similar to that of the flower-faced potu of South America and is an interesting instance of convergent evolution. The flower-faced potu, a diurnal potu from the tropical grasslands of South America. It is the oddest bird found on the South American grasslands. The interior of its beak is coloured and patterned like the petals of a flower, so that when it has its mouth open, it looks exactly like an open bloom. This elaborate mimicry is designed to deceive insects and provides the potu with a meal by merely opening its mouth. Because tropical grassland flowers appear only when there is adequate moisture, the potu migrates seasonally with the rains. The flunky, a very small marmoset-like old-world monkey descended from the vervet monkey from the treetop canopies of the tropical forests in Africa. It has become adapted to a gliding mode of locomotion. In this development, it parallels the evolution of many other mammals that have evolved gliding webs of skin, or patagia, from folds of skin between the limbs and tail. To support the patagia and deal with the stresses involved in flight, the backbone and the limb bones have become remarkably strong for an animal of its size. Steered by its rudder-like tail, the flunky makes great gliding leaps between the crowns of the highest trees to feed on fruit and termites. The gandimot, a colourful corvid from the Eurasian tundra, descended from the Eurasian magpie. It is a notable avian predator of the meeching, along with the booty bird. It retains much of its original body shape and coloration, but has a hooked beak and pointed wings like a skua. In summer, it feeds on rodents and smaller birds in the tundra, but spends its winters in the coniferous forests to the south as a scavenger. Its survival in the cold north is due in no small part to the fact that it is a brood parasite, like with many cuckoos, laying its eggs in the nests of other birds to be incubated and hatched by them. In this way, it conserves the energy it would otherwise use in nest building and brood rearing, at the expense, however, of the ducks and waders on whose nests the eggs are laid. The gull, a large, scavenging, strictly carnivorous herpestine mongoose that is the most efficient scavenger of the African tropical grasslands. Its head and neck are almost totally devoid of hair, allowing it to reach inside the body cavities of carcasses without its coat becoming fouled. Its canine teeth are particularly huge and are capable of crushing most bones to get at the marrow. Gulls live in packs of about a dozen and have developed an almost symbiotic relationship with a species of carnivorous termite. This termite builds its mound with a horizontal shelf projecting out all round, a metre or so above the ground. The shelf provides shelter from the fierce midday sun, where the gull can bring bones and other tough parts of its meal to chew at leisure. The termites feed on the scraps of carrion that the gull invariably leaves scattered around the mound, thus benefiting from the relationship. The giant pitta, a strange pitta from the forest floor of African tropical forests. A large number of birds inhabit the tropical forest regions of the world. The most remarkable, from the point of view of social behaviour, is the giant pitta. The male pitta, unusually for a bird, is about 3 times the size of the female, and each year takes a harem of 3 or 4 females. Each female builds a separate nest in the same vicinity, and relies on the male to provide her with food during the breeding season. The male also provides protection from predators, as well as defending the harem against rivals. The giantula, a large ground sloth-like macropodid that lives in the undergrowth of tropical forests in Australia. It is the largest animal of the Australian forest, and in fact the largest animal found in any of the world's tropical forests. This animal has evolved from the plains-dwelling kangaroos and wallabies that were common when much of the continent was semi-arid grassland, and betrays its ancestry by its upright stance and peculiar loping motion. The giantula is so large that it seems at first sight ill-adapted to life in the confined conditions of the tropical forest floor. However, its great height does give it the advantage that it can feed on leaves and shoots that are well out of reach of other forest inhabitants, and its bulk means that shrubs and small trees do not impede it. As the giantula crashes through the thickets, it leaves behind well-marked trails which, until they are reclaimed by the natural growth of the forest, are used as trackways by smaller animals such as the posset. The growth. A small hornhead frequently found grazing on grassy south-facing slopes of the African-European mountains. It lives in small herds of 4 or 5 females, guarded jealously by a male. The most apparent difference between males and females is in their horn structure. The males have flat, bony, plate-like horns, which they use to buffet one another in their frequent fights for herd dominance. The females' pointed, pyramidal horns are much more deadly and are used to defend themselves and their young against predators. While the herd grazes, the male normally stands guard, watching for signs of danger. When he sees an intruder, the male signals by erecting his long, flag-like tail, and the herd makes for their nearby shelter. The growth's principal enemy is the shurak. In winter, when the snows come, herbivores such as the growths move to lower levels of the mountain altitudes to find shelter and grazing. The carnivorous animals, dependent on them for food, closely follow the herds on their seasonal migrations. The grobit, a rabbit-like pedicid descended from spring hares adapted to move across rocky terrain. This rodent is about 60 centimeters long excluding the tail, and has hooves developed on its 3rd and 4th digits, enabling it to run about the craggy landscape of the rocky desert. The 2nd and 5th digits on its front feet have small claws that almost touch the hooves when the foot is bent, allowing the grobit to grasp and pull down branches and feed on them. The grobit lives in packs all over the rocky desert zones of Africa and Asia. The gurath, a large jaguar-like herpestine mongoose that is the foremost predator of the South American tropical forest. Its ancestor, the small Asian mongoose, was introduced by humans to the then offshore Caribbean islands at the north of the continent, where it became a pest and overran them. When the islands became fused to the mainland, the small Asian mongoose spread southwards and developed into its present jaguar-like form. Its chief prey is the tapimus. The hawk boa, a boa bird from the tropical forest undergrowth of Australia. It is descended from the satin boa bird. Australian boa birds have always been noted for the fantastic structures built by the male for the purpose of wooing a female. The hawk boa is no exception. The boa itself is quite a modest affair, housing the permanent nest and a small altar-like structure at the entrance. While the female incubates the eggs, the male, a rather hawk-like bird, catches a small mammal or reptile and sets it on the altar. The offering is never eaten, but serves as a bait to attract flies, which are then caught by the female and fed to the male to ensure his continuing attention during the long incubation period. Once the eggs have hatched, the chicks are fed on the fly larvae that have developed in the rotting carrion. The hiri-hiri, an arboreal creature descended from the Tasmanian devil. Lying in wait on a low branch, it dangles its strong, prehensile, opossum-like tail down like an innocent vine. When some unsuspecting prey animal trots by, the hiri-hiri seizes it swiftly with its tail and strangles it. The horain, a large, predatory, carnivorous, almost feline-like primate from the tropical grasslands of Africa. It leads a totally ground-dwelling carnivorous mode of life. Lying in the long grass, where it is camouflaged by its stripes and mane, it waits for its chief prey, the gigantelopes, namely tropical gigantelopes. As they pass by, the hiran leaps out onto the back or neck of its quarry, using its sickle-like claws to rip deep wounds around the neck and throat. Severely wounded, the gigantelope soon dies, providing a meal for the whole hiran family group. As predators such as the hiran eat only the softer tissues and muscles of a gigantelope's belly, there is always plenty of meat left for the scavengers, such as raboons, gulls, and birds of prey. The kiffa, a gibbon-like Cercopithecine old-world monkey from the tropical forests of Asia, whose defense against the striga, its most important predator, is based on its social organization. It lives in tribes of up to 20 individuals and builds defensive citadels in the boughs of trees. These large hollow nests, woven from branches and creepers and roofed with a rain-proof thatch of leaves, have several entrances, usually situated where the main branches of the tree thrust through the structure. Most of the work of food gathering and building is carried out by females and young males. The adult males remain behind to defend the citadel and have developed a unique set of features to carry out their highly specialized role. Horny armor over the face and chest, and vicious claws on the thumb and forefinger. It is not unknown for a female to taunt a passing striga and allow herself to be pursued back to the citadel, dashing to safety while the striga finds its way barred by a powerful male capable of disemboweling it with a swipe from its terrible claws. This apparently senseless behaviour, however, provides the colony with fresh meat, a welcome supplement to their mostly vegetarian diets of roots and berries. Only young and inexperienced strigas are caught this way. The killer, a large coyote jackal-like white-toothed shrew from the deserts of Asia and Africa. In the deserts, large predators are not common, and very few meat-eating mammals of any description are found. The killer, however, is one of the few. Standing about 60 centimeters high at the shoulder, it is largely nocturnal and spends most of the day hidden in a network of burrows excavated in soft sand. At night, it hunts smaller mammals and obtains most of the water it needs from the moisture contained in their flesh. The Criskin, a common predatory New World ground cuckoo from the deserts of South America in the Postomic period, 50 million AD. Most desert animals are sandy yellow in colour to blend in with their surroundings and have white undersurfaces that counteract the effects of shade and give them a two-dimensional appearance. That this colour scheme is the result of evolutionary pressure is a belief supported by the darker appearance of animals found on black-grey lava areas and the almost white forms of the same animals found in salt pan regions. Animals that are not camouflaged are predominantly black. Predatory birds, such as the Criskin, reptiles, and the most poisonous and unpalatable arthropods fall into this category. The colour resemblance may be due to a form of mimicry, in which, for some reason, black is an advantageous colour for certain predators, and all others adopt the same colour to derive some similar benefit. The Leaping Devil, a North American desert-dwelling red-toothed shrew with carnivorous habits. It is one of the spitting featherfoot's chief predators and has a morphology and physiology similar to the featherfoot and to the other small desert rodents on which it preys. The Lesser Ptarmigan, a ptarmigan descended from the rock ptarmigan from the northern hemisphere tundra that can make homes in old meeching fortresses. The old fortresses that have been abandoned by meeching colonies provide homes for several of the tundra's other inhabitants. The lesser ptarmigan nests exclusively in old meeching burrows and is sometimes found cohabiting with the meechings themselves, usually in cases where part of the population has already migrated. The long-armed zidder, a black, spider monkey-like colobine old world monkey from the treetop canopy of the African tropical forests. Birds of prey, such as eagles and hawks, are the important predators of the treetops, as they are in any other habitat. The tree-living mammals of these regions must be swift enough to elude them, and also to escape from tree-climbing predators coming up from below. The mammals that accomplish this best are the primates. The long-armed zidder has taken these specializations to the extreme and has developed long arms and legs, fingers and toes, so that it can brachiate or swing its tiny globular body through the branches of the trees at high speed. It has also evolved a prehensile tail, just as its South American cousins, the now extinct New World monkeys, did in the first half of the Cenozoic. Its tail, however, is not used for locomotion, but only for hanging from when resting or asleep. The long-legged quail, a large New World quail from the deserts of North America. Small mammals and reptiles of the desert, like the desert spickle and the fin lizard, are preyed on by ground-dwelling birds such as the long-legged quail. Its eggs, which are laid in sand scrapes in sheltered spots beneath bushes or overhanging rocks, are sat on continuously to protect them from the extremes of heat and cold that are typical of the desert climate's daily temperature range. The breeding cycle of this and many other desert birds is dependent on the rainy season, the birds nesting as soon as the first spring rains appear and continuing as long as the wet season lasts. In unusually dry years, no breeding takes place. The long-necked dipper, a semi-aquatic, partly flightless dipper, descended from the white-throated dipper living near the temperate rivers of Europe. Although there are many examples of flightless birds in the posthomic period, the long-necked dipper is the only bird that spends part of its life with the capacity for flight and the rest flightless. During its early life, the bird develops wings in the normal way, but once it has migrated away from its natal nesting site, it becomes totally earthbound and pursues a purely terrestrial, semi-aquatic existence. Its wings, now no longer necessary, lose their power and gradually atrophy. The long-necked yipper, a long-necked llama-like antilopine bovid from the tropical grasslands of Lemuria. While other local herbivores like valuphants and snorks feed on low-level vegetation, the upper layers of vegetation are exploited by the long-necked yipper, which can reach the leaves and young shoots of the savanna trees. The luti, a nocturnal, temperate woodland-dwelling leporid from Eurasia, descended from the common rabbit and is preyed upon by nocturnal birds of prey. The lutis live in direct competition with the ancient groups of small rodents, the mice, rats and voles. In some areas, the lutis have replaced the rodents completely, whereas in other parts of the woodlands, where the conditions particularly favour them, the rodents have remained successful. The lutis resemble the small rodents in many aspects, particularly in size, but their rabbit ancestry is obviously displayed in the shape of the head and tail. They feed mostly at night, nesting during the day in crevices among tree roots or in holes in the ground. The matriarch tinamou, an odd tinamine tinamou from the tropical forests of South America. It is one of the strangest birds of these regions, with a peculiar sexual dimorphism. Females look like ordinary tinamous, while males are smaller, flightless and hummingbird-like. Its breeding method is similar to that of some species of anglerfish. The female of the species is a ground-living bird, resembling a typical-looking tinamou, very much larger than the male, whom she carries around on her back. The male's wings and digestive system are degenerate, and he is entirely parasitic on the female, sucking her blood through his needle-shaped beak. The male's only biological function is to provide sperm during mating. This relationship arises from the species' low population density, which makes it an advantage for each female to have a mate constantly available, rather than to search for one each breeding season. The meeching. A woodchuck-like creature descended from the lemming, living in the northern hemisphere tundra. As the constantly frozen ground of the tundra makes digging through the earth impossible, all small burrowing rodents found in the tundra are snow tunnelers. One tunneler, in particular, the meeching, similar to the ancient lemming from which it may be descended, has a very considerable effect on the ecology of the area. A colony of meechings may be started by as few as 3 or 4 individuals. They breed profusely, and as their numbers grow, they build a fortress of matted vegetable material to protect them from the frosts and snows. The interior of the fortress is very complex and consists of a network of passages and tiny chambers, one for each individual. The mud gulper. A large semi-aquatic hippopotamus-like animal that is the largest swimming mammal of the African tropical forest swamplands. Although it is derived from the water-dwelling African marsh rat, it shows adaptations that closely parallel those of the extinct hippopotamuses and manatees of Earth's past. Its head is broad, and its eyes, ears and nostrils are located on bumps on the top so that they can still operate even when the animal is totally submerged. The mud gulper eats only water plants, which it scoops up with its wide mouth or scrapes up from the mud with its tusks. Its body is long, and its hind feet are fused to form a flipper, giving it a seal-like appearance. Even though it is very clumsy out of the water, it spends much of its time on mud banks, where it breeds and rears its young in noisy colonies at the water's edge. The night stalker. A large, ferocious, pack-hunting, flightless, leaf-nosed bat from Batavia. Once other vertebrates had established themselves on the islands, a new family of ground-dwelling predatory bats arose. These creatures walk on their front legs, on what would, in the case of a flying bat, be its wings. Their hind legs and feet are still used for grasping, but now fall forward to hang down below their chin. As the bats locate their prey purely by echolocation, their ears and nose flaps have developed at the expense of their eyes, which are now atrophied. The largest and most fearsome of these creatures is the night stalker. 1.5 meters tall, it roams screeching and screaming through the Batavian forests at night in packs. They prey indiscriminately on other mammals and reptiles, attacking them with their ferocious teeth and claws. The night glider. A small, nocturnal, arboreal, gliding musteline mustelid from the tropical forests of South America. During the day it hangs on trees, disguised against the bark, floating down to feed upon nocturnal insects, frogs and smaller mammals at night. Its method of hunting is to impale its prey on the spines that project from its chest. The oak leaf toad. A true toad from the undergrowth of temperate woodlands in Europe and Asia with excellent camouflage. It is descended from the common toad. It gets its name from a peculiar fleshy outgrowth on its back that looks exactly like a fallen oak leaf. The toad lies partly buried in the leaf litter, totally camouflaged and quite motionless except for its round pink tongue, which protrudes and wriggles about just like an earthworm. Any smaller animal, such as a very small mammal, that approaches to investigate, falls victim to the toad's powerful jaws. The animal's only real enemy is a predator rat. These two creatures, the oak leaf toad and the predator rat, have a curious relationship. Within their bloodstreams lies a fluke that spends the juvenile stage in the toad and the adult stage in the predator rat. When the fluke approaches adulthood, it produces a dye that turns the leaf-like outgrowth on the toad's back bright emerald green. As this happens in winter, the toad becomes highly conspicuous and is quickly eaten. In this way, the fluke is transferred into the body of the predator rat, where it becomes sexually mature and breeds. The fluke's eggs then return to the toad through the predator rat's feces, which are eaten by beetles that are preyed upon by the toad. As the fluke needs to spend a period of at least 3 years growing in the toad's body before it is ready to parasitize the predator rat, and as the toad is sexually mature at 18 months, All toads have the opportunity of reproducing before being exposed to predation. The Papuan bird snake, an elipid from the Papuas Islands with markings on its head. It is one of the most active and vicious snakes of the archipelago. The pattern on its face is mimicked by the tail of the terror tail. It and its relatives' ancestors had rafted to Papuas from Australia or the other islands in that corner of the Pacific at one time or another. The Papuan whistler, a group of pachycephaline pachycephalids descended from the Australian golden whistlers that were blown across the ocean from Australia and colonised the islands of Papuas, being the first birds to arrive there. Originally a fairly unspecialised bird, it had, during the rule of humanity, begun to show some differentiation, with distinct beak shapes developing on the islands around the Australian coast. However, it was only on the Papuas archipelago, where all the ecological niches were thrown open to them, that the whistlers really developed spectacularly, producing both insectivorous and seed-eating, as well as predatory forms. The descendants of the particular group of golden whistlers that colonised these islands are now regarded as belonging to a single genus, Insulornis. All the species within this genus are now highly specialised, and quite different from one another, excepting I. harti, which is similar in form to the original ancestral bird. The insect eater, I. piciforma, has developed a strong chisel-like bill with which it tears into the bark of trees to get at burrowing insects. Its feet are modified to allow it to cling to the vertical trunks, and the bird closely resembles the extinct woodpeckers of the northern continent, whose mode of life it closely follows in almost every respect. Nuts and tough seeds are eaten by the nut eater I. macrorhyncha, a parrot-like species which has developed a massive bill and the powerful musculature to operate it. This bird has retained the perching feet of its ancestor and has grown a long tail to balance the weight of its large head. Apart from the hawk whistler, the only natural enemies faced by all the Papuan whistlers, including the hawk whistler itself, are the snakes, the Papuan bird snake specifically being the Papuan whistler's most important predator, which have been rafted to Papuas from Australia or the other islands in that corner of the Pacific at one time or another. The Papuan whistler's wariness of snakes is exploited by the terror tail. The Papuas coral fish, a pufferfish-like tetrodontiform found in the coral reefs around the Papuas Islands. The pamphret, a large predatory carnivorous musteline mustelid unique to the coniferous forests of Eurasia and is one of the few carnivorans still in existence. Its size, up to 2 meters in length, makes it by far the largest predatory animal found in the region, and it probably owes its survival to its low, powerful build and its ability to run through the sparse undergrowth easily, bursting out suddenly upon its prey like spine-tailed squirrels. Pamphrets live in small family groups and normally hunt in pairs. The parashrew, a red-toothed shrew from the western mountains of North America that is perhaps the strangest animal found in any mountainous region. The adults are unremarkable, small, typical-looking shrews, but the juveniles possess one of the strangest devices found in the animal kingdom. At the end of their tails, they have a fantastic parachute structure formed of interwoven hair, which they normally use only once before discarding. When the time comes to leave the parental nest, they launch themselves into the air, relying on the thermal currents that rise from these bare rocky slopes in summer to carry them to a fresh habitat. In some cases, this is several kilometers away. As a means of dispersal, this is a bit hit and miss, but the inevitable high death rate that this behavior produces among young parashrews is more than compensated for by the large numbers of offspring produced by each adult breeding pair. The evolution of the parashrew's parachute tail is primarily due to the creature's ancestry. It is thought that these early creatures used their tails as balancing organs when leaping to catch insects in mid-air. The parachute consists of soft, curled hairs hooked together to form a mat and held in shape by a series of bristles growing from the tip of the tail. The Parops lepidorostrus, a basic-looking starling from the coniferous forests of Europe, descended from the common starling. It is the broadbeak's closest living relative, being a totally different creature. It is only 10 centimeters long and lives mainly on insects that it extracts from the bark of trees within its thin beak. The Pifrit, a bizarre, tiny, semi-aquatic talpine talpid. It is one of the most unusual water-living mammals living in the temperate wetlands of Europe, Asia, and North America. Its length, excluding its tail, is less than 5 centimeters, which puts it among the smallest mammals in existence. Although its body is thin, its feet and tail are broad and are covered with water-repellent hairs which spread its weight over such a large area that it can skate across the water without breaking the surface tension. It lives mainly on the larvae of mosquitoes and midges that are found just under the water surface. It feeds on them by piercing their outer cuticles with its long hairless snout and draining them of their vital juices while they are still in the water. In this way, the Pifrit avoids disturbing the water surface, which would both upset the surface tension and frighten away its prey. The Picktooth, a little rabbuk from the tropical grasslands of Africa. It feeds on low-growing herbs and roots, which it digs up with its tusks and spurs. Its second incisor teeth are developed into strong, laterally directed tusks, and it has a long, spur-like claw on the 4th digit of each forefoot. As it runs only on the 2nd and 3rd toes of each foot, the spurs do not hinder it. The taller grasses are grazed by vast herds of larger African rabbuks, such as the strank and the watu. The Pillophile, a migratory sandpiper descended from the red phalarope from the northern hemisphere tundra. During the summer months, the tundra is literally infested with flying insects and has a large population of insect-eating birds. Many, like the Pillophile, have bristled beaks, a ring of stiff hair-like feathers surrounding the beak that forms a cone and deflects insects into its mouth. The bristles in effect widen the bird's potential capture area and increase its food supply. The Polar Ravine, a fox-like predator rat that lives in the tundra of the northern hemisphere. It is the principal predator of the meeching. It is about the size of the extinct fox and very different from its temperate woodland cousin, the temperate ravine. The latter measures about 114 centimeters in overall length, 30 centimeters high at the shoulder, and weighs 4.5 kilograms. The Polar Ravine is 112 centimeters long, 37 centimeters high at the shoulder, and weighs 6.4 kilograms. It has a small head with tiny eyes and ears, an adaptation that prevents frostbite, and long, dull brown fur that turns white in the winter to camouflage it against the snow. It attacks the meechings by digging into the fortress with its front paws. In early autumn, the Polar Ravine molts its dull summer coat and grows a thicker, creamy brown covering of fur. Although the Polar Ravine is larger than the ravine of the temperate woodlands, it has smaller facial features. The Porpin, a medium-sized pelagornid from coastal Antarctica in the Southern Ocean. Freed of the necessity to come ashore, pelagornids have become completely marine and ultimately have given rise to this completely new order of marine birds, of which the porpin is the commonest surviving example. The porpin, like most of its clade, is a fish-eater. Its distinguishing feature from other species, like the larger vortex, is a long serrated beak that enables it to catch larger fish than would otherwise be possible. So successful has it been that it has remained virtually unchanged for the last 40 million years. The posset, a large omnivorous tapir pig-like creature from the undergrowth of the Australian rainforest. The floor of the great rainforest of the Australian subcontinent is home for a number of marsupial mammals. One of the most generalized and successful of these is the omnivorous posset, the marsupial equivalent of both the tapir and the pig. Like its two placental counterparts, It wanders through the gloomy undergrowth in small herds, snuffing and scraping for food in the thin soil with its flexible, sensitive snout and protruding tusks. Cryptic coloration helps to conceal it from its enemies. It and similarly sized animals will use well-marked trails made by giantolas as they crash through the thickets as trackways until they are reclaimed by the natural growth of the forest. Predator rats, a group of carnivorous rodents. They evolved from rats, hence their names. After the age of man, the extinction of most carnivorans gave rats a chance to take over their niches. In the distant future, they diversified, having to take the place of many carnivorans: cheetahs, wildcats, wolves, foxes, weasels, bears, and even pinnipeds, and evolved a similar form, although they have retained primitive features like a long, hairless tail. They have become Earth's principal carnivorous mammals. The purip bat, a vesper bat found throughout temperate latitudes of the world: Europe, Asia, North America, Africa, and South America. It is so called because of its curious voice. As dusk falls in the temperate woodlands and the moths and night-active flies take to the air, the carnivorous bats appear to feed on them. Bats have proved so successful in their shape and lifestyle that in most parts of the world they have remained remarkably stable in shape and form ever since they first appeared back in the Middle Paleogene. Save for the development of a more sophisticated echolocation system positioned at the front of the face and the absence of eyes in many species, little else has changed. Unlike most other bats, which generally navigate using high-pitched sounds, the purip bat uses a much wider range of frequencies, extending well into the audible level, giving it a much more sophisticated picture of the terrain. The pytheron, a carnivorous, semi-aquatic, pinniped-like relative of the predator rats from the polar region. There are a few different species of pytheron. Pytherons prey on flightless auks and also on fish during the spring months. They occupy the same ecological niche that the seals occupied in earlier times, and like them have developed streamlined, blubbery bodies and fin-shaped limbs. Rabbux, descended from rabbits. In the year 50 million AD, in the Postamic period, they fill in the niches of deer, most antelope, zebras, and even giraffes in part. Raboon, descended from the baboons that flourished on the grasslands during the age of human rule. Their diet changed from omnivorous to carnivorous during the period that the big cats of the grasslands died out. At the same time, they increased their speed by taking to their hind limbs and adopting a totally bipedal locomotion. The forelimbs became reduced and the head was carried further forward, balanced by a thick, heavy tail. In physical form, the raboon bears a distinct resemblance to the carnivorous, non-avian theropod dinosaurs that died out at the end of the Mesozoic. The reed stilt, a tall, almost dinosaur-like creature frequently found near riverbanks and lakesides in the wetlands of temperate woodlands and grasslands in the northern continent. It is about 1 meter high at the shoulder and weighs about 60 kilograms. Its long, slender legs and neck and vertical stripes render it almost totally invisible among reeds, where it is frequently found fishing. Its head and neck are most unusual. Practically all mammals have 7 neck vertebrae, but the reed stilt has 15. In evolutionary terms, the extra vertebrae have appeared quite recently and result from the fact that, in fishing, longer-necked individuals have an advantage over the others. The tooth pattern is degenerate, the incisors, canines and molars having all reverted to an almost reptilian condition in which they are all the same shape. The reed stilt uses this combination of neck and tooth features to catch ray-finned fish by darting out its long neck and snapping shut its needle-pointed teeth. The root sucker, an armoured, almost pink, fairy armadillo-like chrysotid from the deserts of North America. The North American deserts are not completely barren, but contain an intermittent vegetation consisting of cacti and other succulent plants, normally growing as single specimens, each widely separated from one another. The barren soil surface between the plants conceals a vast network of roots, spreading out to collect enough water for each plant to survive. Among the roots lives the root sucker. It is heavily armoured to protect it from desiccation rather than to defend it from attack. Its head is shielded by a broad spade-like plate, and its back is covered by a shiny nut-like shell composed of compacted hair. Its tail and feet are also armoured, but with articulated plates that permit total mobility. The root sucker moves through the sand using its broad feet like paddles and its head shield as a shovel to reach the succulent roots on which it feeds, gnawing them with the edge of its head shield and lower incisors. The ruffle, a long-legged pika from the African-European mountains. Although the mountain areas of the world are so isolated and widely distributed that they can largely be regarded as separate faunal provinces, the fauna of the fold mountain belt between Africa and Europe show characteristics that are typical of mountain life the world over. The ruffle exhibits many of these features. It has a rounded head and body, and disc-like ears, adaptations that guard it against cold. It has long hair under the neck and body to protect its legs from the cold, and its teeth are well adapted for grazing mosses and lichens. The upper incisors are set at an angle and are used for scraping the patchy vegetation from the surfaces of rocks and boulders. The sand flapjack, a fairly large squirrel-like dipodid found in the sandy areas of Asia. It is descended from the jerboa. The physiology of desert animals must tread a narrow path between water conservation and heat regulation. The lack of sweat glands, a water-saving measure, means that less conventional ways must be used to cool the animal in the heat of the day. Usually, this is achieved by large ears or similar outgrowths which, crisscrossed by blood vessels, act as radiators to remove the animal's body heat. A structure of this kind is found on the tail of the sand flapjack. Its excess body heat is carried away by the blood to the tail, where it is dissipated into the atmosphere. When pursued, the animal can move at speed, running with its lengthy tail held well out behind as a counterbalance in the manner of its jerboa ancestor. To conserve water, the flapjack even constructs a condensate trap. As part of their courtship ritual, each pair of flapjacks places a pile of stones over the site of the family burrow. These stones, as well as protecting the burrow from the sun's direct rays during the day, provide a large number of cold surfaces on which moisture can condense at night. Predators of the sand flapjack include desert sharks. The shrock, a large nocturnal temperate woodland-dwelling badger-like white-toothed shrew from Eurasia. It has a size and shape comparable to that of the extinct Eurasian badger. It makes nightly forays through the undergrowth and will take any prey that it chances upon. It has a long snout and broad forepaws with which it digs after burrowing prey animals and excavates its own family nest in soft soil under tree roots. The shurak, a snow leopard-like musteline mustelid closely related to the pamphret of the northern coniferous forests from the African-European mountains. It is one of the deadliest predators found in the African-European mountains. Sure-footed over difficult rocky terrain and well camouflaged by its mottled grey fur, it is the growth's principal enemy. The shuraks hunt in packs, surrounding their prey or cornering them in ravines, sharing the kill among themselves. In winter, when the snows come and the herbivores of the mountains, including the growths, move to lower altitudes to find shelter and food, carnivores such as the shurak closely follow the herds on their seasonal migrations. Skerns, flightless seabirds that have evolved a unique behavioural quirk in response to the problem of incubating eggs in this hostile environment. As well as being a hazardous time for the embryo chicks, the parent birds also run the risk of exposure. The skern has solved the problem by laying its eggs in the warm volcanic sands of the islands and deserting them immediately afterwards. It is able to delay the time of laying until the temperature of the sand is exactly right. When a volcano shows signs of activity, it immediately becomes the scene of frenzied activity. The birds scramble ashore, and with the aid of their temperature-sensitive beaks, probe the sand for areas with the right conditions for incubation. After laying their eggs 10 to 20 centimeters deep and covering them with sand, they return to the sea, seeing neither their eggs nor their offspring again. The slobber, an arboreal, sloth-like possum that lives in Australian tropical forests. A less energetic tree dweller than the chuckaboo, the slobber can be thought of as a kind of marsupial sloth that spends nearly all of its life hanging upside down from trees and creepers. It is totally blind and subsists entirely on insects that it catches in the flowers of its home creeper by entangling them in long strands of mucus dangled from its mouth. Its large, downturned ears and sensory whiskers alert it to an insect's arrival and tell it when to drop the mucus, which it aims at the flower's scent. As the slobber's hair grows in spiral tufts and is pervaded by a parasitic alga, it is completely camouflaged against the background of creepers, and when totally motionless, can escape the attention of other predators. One deadlier predator that the slobber takes pains to avoid is the hiri-hiri. The snork, a small suid-like bovine bovid from the tropical grasslands of Lemuria. While a valuphant feeds only on herbs and roots, which it gouges up with its horns, the grasses themselves are eaten by more lightly built, fleet-footed, even-toed ungulates, such as the snork. The snork has a very long head, with its eyes placed near the top, an adaptation that enables it to keep a watch for predators while grazing. The spine-tailed squirrel, a coniferous forest-dwelling sciurine squirrel from Eurasia with colours like a striped skunk. With so many predators, both mammalian and avian, in the coniferous forests, it is not surprising that the smaller mammals should have evolved such a variety of defensive ploys to ensure their survival. The spine-tailed squirrel is an excellent example of their ingenuity. It has a long, broad, flat tail with quills developed on its underside, which when at rest lie flat over the ground. However, when the animal is alarmed, it throws its tail over its back, and the sudden increase in skin tension erects the quills. This presents an almost impenetrable barrier and can be turned to deflect an attack from either side. The spitting featherfoot, a strange, strictly herbivorous heteromed from the North American deserts. It has small forelimbs and long hind legs for jumping. The toes are fringed by short, stiff hairs. Its kidneys are highly efficient, recycling the animal's wastewater to the point that its urine is more than twice as concentrated as that of a rodent or similar size living in a humid environment. The featherfoot never drinks water, but obtains all the moisture it needs from plants. It can even eat plants that are poisonous to other animals, and has the ability to excrete toxic substances without their having taken part in any metabolic process. It is a nocturnal animal, but if displaced from its deep burrow by a predator during the heat of the day, it can cool itself by producing copious quantities of saliva and coating the front of its body with foam. It also spits at its foe with deadly accuracy. As the saliva contains most of the excreted poisons from the plants, it is an efficient weapon. Needless to say, this defense mechanism dehydrates the animal very quickly and is therefore only used in dire emergency, and even then only for short periods of time. One of the featherfoot's chief predators is the leaping devil. The strank, a striped tropical grassland-dwelling rabbock from Africa. It has a dazzling pattern of stripes like a zebra. The taller grasses are grazed by vast herds of rabbocks like these. Such patterns make individuals merge into one another so that a distant predator gets only a confused impression of the herd as a whole. It is particularly effective in thorn thickets and areas of scrubby woodland. The strick, a large bipedal cavid from the South American tropical grasslands. It is the most generalized running rodent in the South American grasslands. It looks very much like the grazing kangaroos that once existed in Australia, now developed into such creatures as the giantula. They graze among the long grasses in tightly knit groups that are large enough to ensure that they are always at least 2 or 3 individuals with their heads up, looking around for danger, while the rest have their senses buried in the grass. A similar cavid coexisting with the strick is the waka. Because strix and wakas occupy similar ecological niches, they have, in the course of evolution, developed along similar lines from completely different ancestors. The striga, a bizarre arboreal tiger-like felid with the physics and agility of a primate living in the tropical forests of Africa and Asia. During most of the Cenozoic, the primates have enjoyed a degree of security among the treetops. For even though there were some predators, none was adapted to prey on them specifically, but that was before the striga. This fierce little creature developed about 30 million years ago and spread throughout the rainforests of Africa and Asia, its success hinging on the fact that it was as well adapted to life in the trees as its prey. The striga even adopted the bodily shape of the monkeys on which it fed, a long, slender body, forelimbs that could swing apart to an angle of 180 degrees, a prehensile tail, and opposable fingers and toes that allowed it to grasp the branches. The surf bat, a flightless, semi-aquatic, sea lion-like noctilionoid bat from the seaside beaches of Batavia. The Batavian beaches are home to packs of surf bats that fish in the shallow waters around the coral reefs. Their hind legs, wings and tail flaps have developed into swimming and steering organs, and their bodies have become sleek and streamlined. Their evolution from a flying, though strictly terrestrial walking form, into a semi-aquatic creature is very similar to the evolutionary development of the penguin. The swimming anteater. Land-dwelling animals that have taken to an aquatic mode of life have usually done so initially to escape land-dwelling predators. This is probably why the water ant has taken to building its huge nest on rafts in swamps and quiet backwaters. However, in their new mode of life, the ants are still vulnerable to the swimming anteater, which has evolved in parallel with it. This species of anteater lives solely on water ants, and to reach them undetected, it attacks the nest from below, ripping through the waterproof shell with its clawed paddles. Since below the waterline the nest is made of discrete chambers that can rapidly be made watertight in an emergency, little damage is done to the colony as a whole. The ants drowned in an attack, however, are enough to feed the anteater. The swimming monkey, a tailless semi-aquatic Cercopithecine Old World monkey from the wetlands of tropical forests in Africa. It is descended from the Allen's swamp monkey. It is less well adapted than the coexisting mud gulper, but nevertheless efficient in the water. This creature has developed a frog-like body with webbed hind feet, long clawed fingers for catching bony fish, and a ridge down its back to give it stability in the water. Like the mud gulper, its sensory organs are placed high up on its head. It lives in riverside trees, from which it dives to catch the fish that are its staple diet. The tapimus, a large, long-tusked, omnivorous tapir-like dasyproctid that lives in the tropical forests of South America. It feeds in open areas of the forest and is the chief prey of the gurath. The termite burrower, a brown, flightless, burrowing pardalate from the undergrowth of the Australian tropical forest. It is as curious a local bird as the hawk boa. This mole-like bird lives entirely underground in termite nests, where it digs nesting chambers with its huge feet and feeds on the termites with its long and sticky tongue. The terratail, a timid, squirrel-like murine murid and one of the few mammals living on the Papuas Island chain. The Papuan whistler's wariness of snakes is exploited by the terratail. The markings on its tail mimic to a remarkable degree the markings on the head of the Papuan bird snake. When threatened by a predatory bird, or indeed by any other predatory creature, The terratail throws its tail into the typical snake-like threat posture and utters a realistic hiss. It makes its escape rapidly into the undergrowth while its enemy is still recovering from the shock. The Testodon, an armadillo-like erinacid from the undergrowth of the temperate woodlands of Europe. The Testodon is among the insectivorous undergrowth dwellers that have kept to their original lifestyle. It is a descendant of the West European hedgehog. The spines of its ancestor have been replaced by a series of hinged armoured plates, which can roll up and be drawn together to form an impregnable, complete sphere when the animal is threatened. When rolled up tightly, it is almost impossible to grip or penetrate, and even the most determined predator rat finds a meal from this little animal more trouble than it's worth. The tick bird. A small starling-like oxpecker living in the tropical grasslands of the island subcontinent of Lemuria. It has a curious symbiotic relationship with the cleft-back antelope. This relationship is really no more than a strengthening of the symbiosis that had developed between small birds and grazing mammals during the early part of the Cenozoic. Birds on the grassy plains often accompanied the larger mammals, catching the insects disturbed by their hooves or pecking ticks and mites from the hides of the bigger animals themselves. The grazing mammals tolerated this, as the small birds rid them of parasites and also gave warning of approaching danger. In the case of the cleft-back antelope, the relationship has become more intimate, and the animal's back has ceased to be a mere perch and has become a nesting site. Along the animal's back is a pair of ridges, supported by outgrowths from the vertebrae. Between the ridges is a deep cleft lined by stiff hairs that provide an ideal nesting medium for the tick bird. Several families may nest on its back at any one time. Superficial warts on the animal's flanks produce pus at certain times of the year. The pus attracts flies, which lay eggs in the warts. The flies' maggots appear just as the young birds are hatching and provide them with a ready-made source of food. In return, the antelope is supplied with both a constant grooming service and an early warning system that alerts it to approaching predators. The toothed kingfisher. A semi-aquatic tree kingfisher that is frequently found along the watercourses of the tropical forest swamps of Australia. The bill of the kingfisher is strongly serrated with tooth-like points that help it to spear fish. Although it cannot fly as well as its ancestors could, nor can it hover or dive as they did, it has become adept at underwater flight, pursuing its prey in its own medium. After catching a fish, the kingfisher brings it to the surface and gulps it into its throat pouch before taking it back to the nest. As a signal to the opposite sex, the toothed kingfisher's beak changes colour early in the breeding season. The tree drummer. An arboreal white-toothed shrew from the temperate woodlands of Asia. Wood boring is the speciality of the tree drummer genus. These animals, basically shrew-like in form, subsist on a diet of grubs and adult insects, which they gouge out from crevices in the bark. They have masses of sensory bristles on their feet and very large ears, which help them to detect the movement of grubs burrowing in the wood. When a tree drummer finds a grub, it drives its chisel-like teeth into the bark to make a hole big enough to enable it to remove the grub with its trunk-like proboscis. Sometimes the grub becomes skewered on its chisel teeth and needs to be carefully plucked off before being eaten. The tree duck. A whistling duck that lives near the waterways of the tropical forests in Australia, descended from the plumed whistling duck. The tree duck is a water-living creature that almost seems to have changed its mind about its preferred habitat and appears to be in the process of undergoing a change back to the more arboreal lifestyle of its remote ancestors. Although it is still duck-like in appearance, the webs on its feet are now degenerate, and its rounded beak more suitable for feeding on terrestrial insects, lizards and fruit than on water organisms. The tree duck still takes to the water to escape predators, and its young do not venture onto land until they are nearly adults. The tree goose. a goose from the temperate woodlands of Eurasia that lacks the ability to swim and perches on trees in a bizarre way. Being primarily designed for flying, birds have had access to the treetops in a way that few other animals had, and finding that they were safer there than on the ground, they soon became perfectly adapted to this new habitat. As a result, many woodland birds of the posthomic have developed feet with curved opposable toes that are ideal for gripping branches. In one species, the tree goose, these toes have been reduced to 2. They are permanently curved and enable the bird to hang upside down without effort. Because of the bird's size and weight, this attitude is much easier to maintain over long periods than an upright stance, and it has taken to spending long periods roosting in this position. The trevel, a small arboreal rodent from the coniferous forests of Eurasia. Other than the chiselhead, no small rodent found in the coniferous forest is quite so destructive. Most live on shoots, bark, and the seeds found in cones. Many are ground dwellers and feed from the cones where they fall. Others are lightly built and agile enough to scramble along the branches to where the cones are actually growing. The trevel is unusual in having a prehensile tail. Too heavy to reach the cones growing from the slenderest branches, it feeds on them instead by hanging by its tail from a sturdy neighbouring branch and reaching out with its front paws. Like other rodents of this general size, it gathers more than is necessary for its immediate needs and stores the rest for the lean winter months. Its hibernation nest is a long, drooping structure woven together from grass, strips of bark, and pine needles. Built hanging from the end of a branch, it is large enough to accommodate the animal together with sufficient food to see it through the winter. The trovamp, a small, agile, parasitic, blood-sucking shrew from the forest floor of African tropical forests. One of the smaller mammals of the African tropical forest, the trovamp is a parasite which sucks the blood of larger mammals. The trovamp is built rather like a typical soricomorph or one of the smaller prosimian primates. It is very agile, climbing about, usually in packs, among the trunk and the branches of the shrubs. The trovamp is a prodigious jumper and can leap 3 meters from a branch to bury its needle-like jaws into the hide of a passing larger animal. Its protruding canine teeth act as barbs and prevent it from being dislodged from its host until it is finished feeding. As many as 10 trovamps may parasitize one host and will remain feeding until the host animal is severely weakened. The true teal, a small, nocturnal, temperate, woodland-dwelling white-toothed shrew from Asia that provides food for nocturnal birds of prey. It is closely related to the arboreal, diurnal, chisel-toothed tree drummer. The incisors of both the upper and lower jaws of this animal are extended forward to form a structure like a bird's beak, which acts as a probe to catch earthworms and burrowing insects in soft earth and leaf litter. The true teal is completely blind and retains no vestiges of eyes. It is, however, equipped with a large number of sensory whiskers and extremely acute hearing. Its ears, which are enormous for the size of its body, can be rolled into trumpets by a unique set of muscles located at their base and then pressed to the ground to listen for sounds of burrowing. The true teal has an overall length of about 12 centimeters. Its ears are about 2.5 centimeters long. The termi, an almost anteater-like suine suid from the forest floor of African tropical forests. Feeding principally on ubiquitous termites, the termi is one of the few large mammals found on the African rainforest floor. A close relative is the zoranda. It is descended from the giant forest hogs that were once common in this environment. In the termi, the tusks of the upper jaw are projected forwards, elongating the snout still further, and have turned outwards to produce strong pick-like instruments with which it digs into termite mounds. The lower jaw has lost all its teeth and musculature, and the mouth has diminished to a tiny hole through which sticks out its ribbon-like tongue to gather termites. The tusked mole, a bizarre talpine talpid from the undergrowth of temperate woodlands in Europe, descended from the European mole. Looking very much like a mole from 50 million years before, it leads a burrowing existence and has adopted the streamlined shape, velvety fur and spade-like feet of its distant cousin. However, this is where the resemblance stops. It has two huge tusks extending from its jaws and a paddle-shaped tail. As it burrows, the animal pushes forward with its feet in a rolling motion so that its tusks ream out in the soil in front of it. The loose soil is pushed back by the feet and compacted to the tunnel walls by its tail. As well as eating earthworms and other burrowing invertebrates, it also preys on small, surface-living fellow vertebrates, especially mice, voles, and lizards. The ubiquitous termite, a tropical forest floor-dwelling termite from Africa. The valuphant, a large cattle-like bovine bovid from the tropical grasslands of Lemuria. It is the largest even-toed ungulate in Lemuria. It is a massive animal, some 5 meters long, with a squat rounded body and massive legs, resembling those of the gigantelopes to which it is distantly related. Its most distinctive feature is the tall ridge running down its back and neck. The ridge is supported by the neural spines of the vertebrae and may be of use in regulating the animal's temperature. The valuphant feeds only on herbs and roots, which it gouges up with its horns. The grasses themselves are eaten by more lightly built, fleet-footed, even-toed ungulates, such as the snork. The vortex, a huge baleen whale-like pelagornid from the waters around Antarctica. In contrast with the vast Antarctic continent, which in the postomic supports life only around the edges, the surrounding southern ocean teems with life. Among its most notable inhabitants is the vortex, the largest animal found anywhere in the world at 30 tons and over 12 meters in overall length, including its 2.75 meter beak. Resembling many of the sea creatures of the past, it has a long, tapering, necklace body, a powerful paddle-shaped tail, and long stabilizing flipper wings, an ideal arrangement for efficient movement through water. The vortex is in fact descended from the penguins, which, although they were birds, had long since lost the power of flight and were totally adapted to a semi-aquatic lifestyle, excepting for one thing: they always had to come on shore to lay their eggs. This remained so until, shortly after the extinction of the whales, one species of penguin developed the ability to retain its single egg internally until it was ready to hatch, and gave birth to live young in the open ocean, making it the first ovoviviparous bird. Freed of the necessity to come ashore, this species became completely marine and ultimately gave rise to a completely new order of marine birds, the pelagornids, of which the smaller porpin is the commonest surviving example. Although a plankton eater and very much larger, the vortex is also a member of the pelagornid order. Its beak has developed into a large plankton sieve, which consists of a very fine mesh of bone plates instead of coalesced hair, as in the case of the whale's baleen plates. The waka, a large, somewhat ratite-like creature with no front limbs, native to the South American tropical grasslands. It is the most specialized member of the postomic South American plains-dwelling rodents, and perhaps the most highly adapted running animal in the world. Because of its bipedal stance, its forelimbs have become less important and are now completely atrophied. Its globular body and long hind legs support an equally long neck and tail, which balance one another, maintaining the animal's center of gravity over its hips. These features give the creature a clear view of the surrounding countryside. Even when the waka is grazing in long grass, its eyes are placed high enough on its elongated head for it to see the approach of a predator. Because strix and wakas occupy similar ecological niches, they have, in the course of evolution, developed along similar lines from completely different ancestors. The watu, a large spotted rabbuk from the African tropical grasslands. It carries large angular blotches similar to those once possessed by the giraffe. The taller grasses are grazed by vast herds of rabbuks like these. Such patterns make individuals merge into one another so that a distant predator gets only a confused impression of the herd as a whole. It is particularly effective in thorn thickets and areas of scrubby woodland. The woolly gigantelope, a northern tundra-dwelling migratory gigantelope from the tundra of the northern continent, similar to a woolly mammoth. For many large animals, the tundra is only habitable during the summer months, and in winter they migrate southwards into the coniferous forests where conditions are less austere. The largest of these animals is the woolly gigantelope. It differs from equatorial gigantelopes mainly in size and in the possession of a large, fatty hump which provides it with nourishment during the hungry winter months. It has a long, shaggy winter coat and broad hooves which prevent it from sinking into soft snow. It uses its enormous horns as snow ploughs to expose the mosses, lichens and herbaceous plants on which it feeds. Its eyes are small to avoid being frostbitten, and its nostrils are bordered by blood vessels that warm the air before it reaches the lungs. In early summer, the woolly gigantelope loses its shaggy coat and takes on a much sleeker appearance. The hump, which sustained it through the winter months, is now entirely depleted, and it spends much of the time eating to rebuild its energy store for the long trek back south in the autumn. Because of the woolly gigantelope's size, 3 meters at the shoulder without the hump and 7.5 tons in weight, there are very few predators powerful enough to threaten it. Its only real enemy is the bardalot. The zoranda, a large elephant-like suine suid with a somewhat okapi-like coloration to it, living in the tropical forests of Africa. It comes from the same ancestral stock as the coexisting termi, that being the giant forest hog. This large, strictly herbivorous suid lives on the sparse herbs and shrubs found in less dense areas of the forest floor. Its 1.5 meter long trunk, developed from a snout similar to the trunk of the ancient elephant, enables the zoranda to reach leafy branches 4 meters above the ground, where it can snip branches and vines from the trees by the scissor action of its upper and lower tusks. Despite its long nose, the zoranda has little sense of smell. Like other mammals on the forest floor, the lack of wind and general circulation among the dense trees means that scents do not travel far. Relying on its keen hearing to warn it of the approach of an enemy, it takes off into the thicker parts of the forest at the arrival of a predator, squeezing its narrow body between the tree trunks and remaining motionless, camouflaged by its stripes and dark body colour. It measures about 2.3 meters high at the shoulder and weighs 1 ton. Zorandas live in small herds of up to 8 in number. Each herd usually contains only 1 adult male. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the weird worlds of Dougal Dixon. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. And also, please don't forget to hit the like button and the bell icon, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who you feel would enjoy it. This has been the Bewarecast, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.